And we're doing this shit again. It is Shit Shooting Sunday, the digital prepping I'm in edition. So that would be the 5th of fucking August. We're in August already. How's August real? So a little bit of housekeeping before we get started. First thing is first, this is brought to you by Brave, the ad-resistant, track-resistant browsing experience. It's also brought to you by Cash App, which is a dollar and Bitcoin wallet that come with a Visa card. And it's also brought to you by Liberty Mugs, mugs that you can use to piss off your coworkers while also consuming fluid. There are plenty of other ways to support the show in the description, and there is also something new that I'm doing with Loopin' It. So you can check that out every morning on this channel at 11 a.m. Eastern Time. And that is Bad Morning News, which has a Facebook page now. It'll have a Twitter soon. And effectively, what this is it's news designed to be the antidote to your morning news blase bullshit that's designed to get you very complacent with your job, with being a cog in the machine. We're the opposite of that. We're open to anchors. If you've got a regular day that you want to show up and be an anchor on, feel free to do so. But with that being said, why doesn't everybody introduce themselves? Let us know where they can be found, and generally what they think of digital prepping. I guess after the introductions are done, we can do that in random order, and we'll hit the meat of the show. Anybody first?
I'll go first. So my name is Shane, and I am one half of Hubba Supremacy. You can find us on YouTube at Hubba Supremacy, and also on Twitter. You can find me at Shane Scalf, and we also have our website, HubbaSupremacy.com. And to be completely honest, I am here to kind of learn about digital prepping, and so I'm very excited and willing to know exactly what's going on. So thank you again to Jeremiah for having me.
Hello, everybody. This is Finian. You can find me on Steemit, the same account name that I have on here. And I'm also on Twitter under my business account, Liberty Pro PI. I'm a private investigator and residential security expert. And I'm not quite sure exactly what they mean by tonight's topic. So I'm looking forward to getting into it to learn some more as well. Thanks.
This is Skip. I also go by Collapsitarian, and you can find me on Twitter at The Free Rifleman. And you can also find me as at Collapsitarian1 is my backup account. And I don't know that I really have an answer for what digital prepping is, but I can tell you what physical prepping is all about. And if I have any control over today's topics, I will probably steer things in the direction of the practical, what you can do at home, because quite frankly, I have a digital handicap. Because I'm old.
I guess before we proceed, I'll just say, like, because Finian asked in the private chat over here what digital prepping means, and I said basically decentralized currency, privacy, hacking, etc. So we'll be talking about things like meshes, essentially like what we can do that the third world is already doing in many places to get around censorship and tyrannical government, etc. Because it's very valuable to have a communications network in terms of the ability to still have a digital footprint in a post-collapse scenario. And if you can't, then you're going to be very vulnerable to the people who do, because the digital front is a weapon all to its own. So basically that's what it is. But continue introducing yourselves.
Sure. So excellent. Now that I know what we're talking about, that's my fault for not looking into it enough, but I am looking forward to it. And I do have a couple things that I'd like to share on today's subject as well. So awesome. This will be as much sharing as it will be learning for me today.
Hey, everybody. This is Aaron. You can find me on Twitter at Cape Cod Peace. I I try to frequent this show as much as possible because I end up learning way more than I'm able to offer for input, and probably going to be along the same lines today. I don't think I know any more or less about digital prepping than anybody else, so keeping my ears open.
Hey, I'm Lupinate. You can find me on Minds or Discord as Lupinate and Steemit as an Arctic Wolf, and find me on Bad Morning News pretty much every single episode. And for digital prepping, I have some knowledge of it. I like to think as well it's prepping the mind, trying to get an idea of how to think in the modern world, because it's a lot. Decentralized thought is not something many people can comprehend, and it's important to get that first so that you can understand everything else.
Agreed. So I guess a good way to start, a good, nice, accessible way to start that would also appeal to my largely libertarian audience would be to start discussing cryptocurrency. So in your minds, what is cryptocurrency to you, and how useful is it?
I'll start on that one. It's a competitor to the current banking system, and it's way more complicated, but basically the summary that I give people is every penny that you can take out of the current banking system, whether it be putting it into goods, silver or gold or crypto, does more and more damage to that current system, and that should be our objective, basically to kill it by 1,000 cuts. So by purchasing crypto, you're withdrawing your money from banks and not allowing them to further the problems that we're having because of the current banking system. That'd be the main issue to keep in mind. I do, though, caution people to only purchase crypto with gambling money. So I would not be getting a mortgage or maxing out credit cards with it. But there's certainly money to be made from it, and it's also, in a way, a store of value. If you want to buy it and hold and keep it for a long time, you're going to do well, basically, depending on what crypto you invest in. You just have to be careful about which ones you pick.
If I can add to what Finian said, I think that that's actually an excellent way of describing cryptocurrency, because, you know, if everything was working the way things should, and we didn't have a Federal Reserve, and we didn't have a monopoly on monopoly money by way of a petrodollar, and the central banks didn't have run of the globe, as well as, you know, the IMF and International Bank of Settlement, or Bank of International Settlements. If all of that wasn't the case, and we had cryptocurrency right now, we probably would not have problems with the economy like we do, because it would do the most important thing that centralized currencies have never been able to do, and that is it would have guaranteed, or come very close to a near guarantee, of a laissez-faire economy. And a laissez-faire economy is the healthiest economy, simply because the buyers set the prices rather than having price controls and attempts at essential or as a controlled economy. And that in of itself would actually run a clean economy. And I think that the most powerful thing that cryptocurrencies can do is they can demonstrate that in small aspects. Right now, cryptocurrency is kind of in its infancy, which is why it's rapidly expanding, and people are, you know, turning around and being millionaires overnight because they were smart and they bought the right cryptocurrency at the right time, and maybe they're in cryptocurrency development. I think that you'll see a lot of false operations within cryptocurrency, especially most likely propped up by the central banks, just simply because they want to see it fail. If they can't run it, they want to see it fail. And I think that the more people get involved in cryptocurrency, the more people will start to see the potential that it has And I think that it's a great way to hedge yourself against a economic collapse, just simply because if the economy were to collapse, but the internet were to remain intact and different types of services would still be available, it's not the four horsemen kind of collapse that Finian and I sometimes paint. But if it were like a moderate collapse or a medium collapse, cryptocurrency could quite simply fix a lot of the problems that we have out there. And I think that we may have the opportunity to see this actually come to fruition. And so I'm excited about it. I'm not an expert. I just understand the concept behind it. And so people who are younger than I am, I'm getting ready to turn 47. People who are younger than I am understand it a lot better than I do. But I'm pretty fast at learning, and I'm excited. I think it's a great opportunity for technology to be ahead of the problem and be able to solve, quite frankly, what I think is possibly 4,000-year problem of central banks.
Very cool. Anybody else got something to say?
Yeah, I'm a huge shill for Monero. That's a privacy-centric cryptocurrency. I think the idea of in the context of digital prepping, I think cryptocurrency assumes a soft collapse when the U.S. dollar does go down, which you don't have to be an economics expert to figure out that that's going to happen. It's just a matter of when. Cryptocurrency as a hedge against that assumes a soft collapse, like the grid will still be up, you'll still have power, we'll still have the internet, and that's not a bad idea. Between prepping for both a hard collapse with ammo, precious metals, and seeds and whatnot, and then a soft collapse with cryptocurrency. It's all about diversification, and I'm a huge fan of that. I tend to lean towards the privacy-centric ones.
I wanted to bring up too, before I forget and not mention it later, another thing with crypto that makes it so the banking systems and the governments, which I repeat myself there, but one of the reasons why they don't like it is because they can't tax transactions on it. That's a big problem that they have with it.
You mentioned gold as well, because that's another one of the ones that you can do for a soft collapse. It's a very fungible investment, as is silver. And if when the dollar goes, that's the sort of thing that will work in both situations.
Yeah, one of the problems crypto has, of course, is in scenarios, like Puerto Rico recently, or anywhere basically where you lose the electric grid or the internet goes down or cell phones don't work anymore, then crypto also does not work.
That's correct, but I would say if you're in a localized problem, that can simply be solved by having other ways of being able to access something. Like, for instance, if you were to carry some silver with you and you're traveling through an area that something like this were to happen. I don't know how many of us are independently wealthy, but I've been on a vacation or two. And, of course, in the back of my mind, I always have thinking, okay, what would I do in this situation? Because, let's face it, I went on a cruise one year and I thought to myself, I'm literally exposed. Like, in that situation on this cruise where I couldn't take but maybe a third of what I would normally take on a vacation, I thought to myself, I've got a little store of wealth, I've got some money, I might be able to, grab access to this or that. But I mean, if shit were to hit the fan while I'm on a cruise ship, I'm literally exposed. And that's not really something that I'm really comfortable with. And so that was kind of a challenge for me. Of course, I had to pack certain things, in a waterborne survival scenario and things like that. But in the end, that cryptocurrency is still there when you do get to a point where you actually have service again. And that that right there could be a lifesaver, because it could mean the difference of you being able to get completely out of a region. Whereas, you know, you're not going to run around with $10,000 in your wallet. You could have access to that or more, you know, at your fingertips, to be able to make a transaction happen, a helicopter ride out of an area or something like that, or a private, you know, booking a private flight or something like that. So I think that there's, you know, demonstrated advantages to having diversification. I don't think anybody here will disagree with that. Having a level of diversification that allows you to have access to precious metals, dollars, because, you know, at some point dollars still do have some value, especially at the initial stages of some type of, you know, cataclysm, you know.
Of course, you know, everything has value because value is subjective. So,
well, no,
but,
that's true. That's true. But I mean, what I'm saying is that
it'll probably still be valuable to a significant portion of the populace.
Well, you know, it's irony. If you watch The Walking Dead, I think at some point somebody offers somebody something, you know, money, and they're like, "This, what is this? You know, we can burn it to stay warm." You know, that's literally all it is. And
see, but it is a very durable fabric, though. You should build clothes out of it, or like bags. You could use it for pockets on the outside of a molly vest.
Right. Okay. So there is a level of value. And what I would say is that if you're in a hurricane, water has value, right? You know, bottled water and things like that. Mm-hmm. But dollars can buy you more water for people who might be willing to part with theirs.
Or just like in this particular situation, if we're talking prepping, we should be talking fucking filters, buying a filter, because there are filters that you can buy that can filter like 20 gallons of water in less than a day, and they fit in your backpack.
Well, millions. There's actually one that I keep in my bag that I carry with me everywhere I go, on a plane, off the plane, it doesn't matter, that will do 100,000 gallons. And then there's another one that does 1 million gallons that's a little bit larger, not significantly larger, maybe 30% bigger. But
compare it to a standard coffee thermos, like something that fits in your hand.
Yeah, this is smaller than that.
It's way smaller.
Oh shit, really?
Yeah.
So is this like is this like basically slightly bigger than a life straw then?
It's a little bit bigger. They have one where you can put it as an inline filter. So if you have like a water
crank,
like a water pump or something like that, you could actually use it to basically draw water through it. You could also set it up to where it would filter water by way of gravity, where you have a 5-gallon bucket, you know, maybe sitting up on top of a refrigerator, and then have a hose coming out of that bucket and then down into this. You could do that. And then of course I do have a life straw that I carry with me. And so it's kind of nice to have those, you know, levels of, you know, because one can be deployed at a moment's notice, and maybe at the quick halt where I'm like literally there for 15 minutes and then I've got to keep moving. That might not be the time that you want to be like trying to build a solar still, for instance. Right. And so there's levels of water purification, just like there's levels of fire starting or fire building that I think are also valuable. And so while we're talking about, you know, the prepping side, there is a survival aspect of things, because what good is your money if you're not alive to enjoy it?
Yeah, we've got this thing. Finian's showing us what he uses, and it looks fairly official. Is that one of the ones with the crank?
This is not. It actually just works by water pressure, so like you suck on the other side of it basically. But this is 100,000 gallons, and it's tiny. I mean, like, here's my hand.
Yeah.
And
that's a very small footprint. You could fit that in an inch bag or a fucking prepping carry bag.
Yeah, and it's called the Sawyer Mini, and yeah, this goes everywhere I go, because no matter what, you get clean drinking water, and it'll go in line to like a water bladder, so you can dump your bladder of water in any water you want very quickly. So like go up to a stream or a pond or something and just fill it up, and then just keep moving, or go back under cover or concealment basically.
Very
and
cool.
it allows you to not stand there and filter it like most systems would require you to do. So you can grab the
Well,
water and filter it as you drink it or when you need it later.
that is cool. But just to stick to digital prepping, because next week we're going to go really hard into physical prepping, and then the next week we're going to go into how to build certain devices and shit so that we can have a concrete plan once the shit does hit the fan. But in terms of digital prepping, how many people here know about mesh networks and how effective those are?
I know enough to be dangerous. The main concern I have with a mesh network is that, at least if we're talking about cryptocurrency again, most of those cryptocurrencies have nodes and it's very widespread network. So if you had a local community or your neighbors set up a mesh network, then all that stuff's still not going to work.
Well,
But
unless
it
of course you
allows,
just
like,
made your own neighborhood cryptocurrency. You could do that. You could fork it.
true. Yeah, but at least you're going to have communications with them. So you could set up your own internet basically with your area, and it's still going to work if everything else shuts down. One of the other ways that this gets implemented is in rural areas that don't have like the normal DSL and fiber and coax cable, that kind of stuff, the cable connections. They will have, they'll put up a tower, a business will, and they'll use microwave. And everybody in range of that tower basically has internet. Well, if the internet goes down, all the people connected to that tower can still talk to each other. So it's not exactly a mesh network. It's got a single point of failure, but theoretically you could set up those towers over a wider area, and as long as you have electricity, each of the towers could be set up to talk to each other, and you've created a mesh network.
So we lost a couple people temporarily because Google fucking sucks. Which, by the way, is a great piece of evidence that decentralization is good. But first off, Skip, you have your camera enabled right now. And second off, what about you, Aaron? Do you know anything about mesh networks? I'm assuming that you would because your communications in the Navy, right?
Yeah, I know. I actually looked into a while ago some of the commercial options, and I don't remember what it's called, but there's basically a portable mesh network generator, and I'm probably saying that wrong, that you can buy for, I think it's like $100 or $120, and you can send encrypted text messages over it, and you can also control who you have in your network as far as availability to communicate with. And I can't for the life of me remember its name. I'm gonna get back to you on that. But that really intrigued me. Just on the off chance that the grid does go out and you don't want your cell phone to be a paperweight. So something like that.
Well, oh, and that's the other thing. I'll be going into some of the apps I use for potential prepping situation, and I'll be recommending some apps for people to use in case they want to help digitally prep in that sort of way, because your phone is not a paperweight, and ever thinking about it like that is letting the elites win.
Go Tenna.
Yeah. And I've heard of that too. And also Pyramid Wi-Fi in case you ever just want to set up essentially a VPN on any public network. Lupinit, what about you? What do you know about mesh networks?
I'm using a meshnet now, technically, because Sky does meshnet provision as part of its services. So it's actually one of the best systems I've ever had to work with.
Why
really do enjoy it.
That? Why don't you describe that? Like, first off, just full disclosure, he is British. He lives in Britain, so his technology might operate slightly differently to the majority of the people in this call. But why don't you describe how that works on a mesh level with your particular setup? And also, Skip, I think you're cleaning a gun. If you would turn off your mic. All right, thank you. But good on you for cleaning a gun.
Actually, I'm building one right now. This will be my third 308 that I've built in the recent days.
Oh, I thought I heard a brush.
You hear it's actually 1,000 grit sandpaper because
Oh, okay.
I'm building here. I'll hold it up real quick, as I don't know if you can see that, but I'm building an
Very cool.
80% 308, and it requires just a little bit of fitting because drill bits are imperfect, and so it's actually kind of nice to build something like this and not have a fucking serial number. Okay,
So
that's
so
all.
is that printed, or is it like in polymer, or is that at all metal?
It is polymer, but it is not printed. It is actually a resin. It's a poly resin with glass nanotubes. So it's very durable. It's very light, and they take a hell of a beating.
Very cool. All right. Yeah, because I'm always interested in that, and 3D printing is something we're going to go over today as well, since 3D printing is technically part of digital prepping too. So anyway, Lupinit, why don't you describe how that works on your community level?
Well, as I said, it's more home. So Sky basically have they've been working on using sort of the latest bleeding edge tech that they can for trying to provide the best service, because they're in competition with BT, which has the largest network in the country, because of their historic ties to the phone line system, which is because of the government, because they had such a monopolistic control of the system. The government actually split them into two companies. So there's BT now and there's OpenReach. They are two totally different companies. One controls the pipes, one provides ISP and phone service. So it's kind of like I'm trying to think of the closest proxy for something in the States. It'd be like Earthlink and AT&T back in the day, for those of you who are old enough to remember them. Those two companies, one provided you with the line, one provided you with the actual service. And it works well, actually. The coverage is good, the connectivity is good, every device amplifies the rest of the network. It only becomes a problem when you're dealing with like a lot of buildings and things to get in between, like stone walls. That really becomes a major problem. It has its limits technically. And that's part of the reason why I'm actually more interested in things like Li-Fi, which is point-to-point internet connection by light. It's it's one of those things that's probably got another 20, 30 years to come to fruition.
No. I mean, I know what you're talking about, and no way. No, that's going to be here in like 2022.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, because the way technology is accelerating, especially with the way that they're working on making wearable graphene tech in 2019, so that's going to accelerate the way that they work on everything.
Wow.
Fucking what? They're almost there on quantum computing. And when that happens and they get quantum computing and then they figure out how to do AI with quantum computing, it's going to be fucking nuts how much technology they can make in a short period of time. And, I think the elites are controlling that, but that's my personal bias.
Well, there's actually some good news on the...
It still means that the accelerationism is probably going to happen faster, but go ahead.
I was going to say that there is actually some good news for those of us who can't afford to buy a quantum computer yet, like anybody who isn't Google or a government.
Well, and it'll never really be, by the way, a quantum computer that you can buy or store in your pocket like a cell phone, because quantum computers require massive cooling operations, and I don't think they can figure out a way to make quantum computing work without a massive server center. So you might benefit from quantum computing and you might be able to store your data and process it on quantum computing, but it'll be stored elsewhere, the actual processing centers, as far as I know.
Well, this is kind of my point. They've some bright spark, like 17-year-old has managed to find out some way to beat one of the major problems with normal computing that quantum computing was supposed to solve, with equal efficiency to what quantum computing could do. So I think it was the recommendation problem, which is one of the things quantum computing was going to be like infinitely more powerful to solve. Some kids managed to find an algorithm that manages to do it with as much efficiency as a quantum computer can.
So it's effective
So-
quantum computing, but it's not actually quantum computing.
Exactly. It's using
Gotcha.
existing technology at its edge and actually getting the ultimate amount of performance that you can from it without having to develop an entirely new system. So if quantum's going to work, it has to beat that new benchmark. Otherwise, it's no why go quantum?
Right. Oh, and so on that level, then go back to Li-Fi. Describe that a bit for the audience.
All right. So
Yeah.
Li-Fi is basically light frequency based internet. So you could get special lamps basically that would give you internet access. You could get all sorts of light bulbs basically that do a signal to a device. You'd need a receptor for the device, but obviously that'd be something that'd have to be built, not that difficult to do so either. The only downside is it is line of sight. So you need to have
Sorta. I mean, because it's line of sight, but prisms work. So you could theoretically have line of sight and then like have it split off into several different lines of sight as long as you were willing to split the beam.
I know,
So
and there
fiber
are
within
clever
fiber.
ways of doing it.
Go ahead, Finian, I think it was.
Yeah, it sounds like fiber without the actual medium, without
Yeah.
the fiber medium.
Which is actually better because fiber loses a lot of data along the way, which is why all you have to do to steal somebody's information along a fiber line is find a terminal that has exposed lines and doesn't have them behind metal like some of them do. And bend the wire. And then you can bend the wire. It'll slow down their internet like so indistinguishably that they won't be able to see it. And that you can just crimp it and put a reader on it and read everything. And you know, the fact that I know how to do that is not something that the government probably likes, but whatever. They're already probably listening to the stream. But it's a really vulnerable thing. Whereas if it was beamed directly, if it was like a laser kind of technology, there's every likelihood that it could be less vulnerable because there wouldn't be a physical medium that was already bleeding it off and providing resistance for that bleed off at specific junctions that are manipulable by an individual with some proper technology and equipment.
Line of
Plus,
sight when it comes to things collapsing or nuclear war or some other major problem, line of sight communications is actually one of the things that the government actually focuses on because they know that it's going to work. And they can do
and they primarily
from-
focus on microwave right now, but they could focus on anything they wanted, like this Li-Fi soon.
Yeah, they could change it all over to that, but the main point is it works, and it works at very long distances. So, you know, we as individuals, not governments, you know, working in your community, we should be setting things up in a similar fashion, basically. I think we should have wired networks, even like the old field phones and stuff, have those set up with your neighbors. But for networking and computer purposes, then yeah, you're going to want access points and line of sight communications between the different nodes.
The best option then is probably going to be some sort of exterior Wi-Fi system. I mean, I know that they exist, but they are fucking expensive at the moment. But the kinds of, I mean, you're talking throughputs in like the gigs, not megs. And over here, megs is about as good as you can get. So it's to be able to go up at like 20-fold would be quite nice.
Dude,
And
it's
would
going to be
rapidly.
so insane when we get trigs.
What are trigs? I've not heard of that one.
Well, I mean, that's very far in the future, maybe, like, or maybe accelerationism is going to push up the deadline, but they're trying to figure out how to get, they're trying to figure out how to do, like, effectively move up from that megabits per second to gigabits per second to, I forget exactly what the word is, but it's trigabits, maybe?
No,
It's
terabits.
terabits.
It's
Yeah, there we go.
terabit.
Yeah, there we go. But the whole, like, idea of being able to send terabits of data. Like, ooh, dude, that's like digital porn right there. You could send like 4,000 movies
Literally.
in a second. It's fucking insane.
What's the speed of 5G? I'd have to look it up, but I know there's an initiative right now to get 5G running all over the place.
Well,
And
Yeah,
okay,
that's
5G
way
might give you megs. I mean, 4G gives you. I mean, I'm on 4G now. Let's see what I'm getting out of this. About 26.2K per second, and that's kilobyte, not bit. So
all right, because
it's
I've had megabit connections many years ago using cellular, so they should be able to do way faster than that now.
well, but here's the
yeah.
problem with 5G is that it's faster, but it's shortwave. So they have to put these things everywhere, and there's a massive health risk there, which is why part of digital prepping should be making your home safer from those sorts of frequencies, like not having the 5G on your router while you sleep, not putting your phone next to your head, etc. Blah, all those things.
That's a basic thing people should keep in mind, is that for now, at least the tech that we have, the higher the speed, the shorter the distance. So it's just something to keep in mind. Even in your home routers, like you can do 2.4 gigahertz on an A or B, and then that's going to be just fine as long as you're within X distance. But if you go up to a higher speed, even in like a 3-story house, you're going to have problems if your access point's in the basement and you're trying to use it in the attic.
Again, this is why Li-Fi is a winner, because as long as you've got access points, as long as you have a light source, you have an access point. As long as you manage to get the beam from the main device to go around every point where you want to access. And that's going to be the only tricky bit, is basically planning your houses or redesigning houses to be Wi-Fi compatible. And it may just be something unobtrusive, like a little hole up in the ceiling kind of thing, where you go a little dot that then transmits a signal to every light fixture that you have in the house, which then transmits a signal down to every device you have in your house. But again, you have to have them on, you have to have your lights on. I mean, this is the other problem. If you make everything light oriented, then you have an energy consumption increase that you'll have to take into account as well. There are swings and roundabouts to all these things. And the big benefit is in a post-collapse sort of society where we're in our ideal. The systems have failed and people have rejected them. That kind of principle. You're going to see a lot more unusual technology come out. I mean, there's already talking. I think there's talk about alternatives to even using light, using other mediums for this type of thing. I mean, with things like power, the other major question is power. Communication is a good thing to try and improve, but power is going to be, as in like electricity, energy, is the big thing that everybody seems to initially overlook and then go, oh shit, we need that. Fuel is a necessity in the modern age in some way, shape, or form. And the sources of fuel that we have now are not going to be compatible to a large extent with a free society because they're too vastly controlled. So a paradigm shift is going to have to change with energy. And one of those changes is going to probably be Lifter, which we've talked about before in this in previous shit shooting Sundays, but it's always worth re-mentioning and reminding people of the power of thorium.
Well, why don't you do that then?
Fair enough. I recommend to everybody who's watching this, there is at least a couple of YouTube videos. There's one really short one that sort of gives you the highlights of what Lifter LFTR reactors are and what thorium is. And then there's a much longer, like 2-hour long documentary on these types of reactors from their history during the Cold War when America was trying to build a nuclear plane that would be able to basically never come down from the skies. And eventually they abandoned that for air refueling. But that was originally the idea was you build a little nuclear reactor that's powered by thorium on the plane. And that would then allow the plane to fly indefinitely as long as they had thorium pellets to fuel the reactor. And these aren't really, it's not that it's a perpetual motion device. It's just a highly efficient fuel system with loads of ways of creating instant fail-safes. It burns all of its fuel, and all it needs is more thorium to keep working. And if it doesn't have fuel, it shuts itself down. If it overheats, it shuts itself down. It's one of these types of devices that you could fit in pretty much any home. It really doesn't take up much space. It's not like a nuclear power plant. It's more like a power generator that is much more contained. They are amazing to comprehend. This kind of technology is out there. It'll never come into the mainstream if we just rely on the government, because the government, when they think of nuclear, they think of uranium and plutonium and the breeder reactors we have now. Those are not the only kinds that exist. And there would need to be a grassroots kind of movement to change people's view on nuclear power to adopt something that is sustainable rather than something that is guaranteed to completely destroy everything in a X mile radius if a Carrington event occurs. And it's that kind of thing that people need to start taking into consideration. What if the worst happens? How bad would this device be? And the reactors we have today would be very, very, very bad. Lifter, they just shut down. You'd be able to restart them, replace the bits that basically fry, and that's all you'd have to worry about, because they are. It's not an electronic system; it's a mechanical system. Basically, bits of it melt and dump all the fuel into a holding cell where it cools down and no longer becomes reactive. It's quite an ingenious little system that is designed to be with safety in mind first, rather than we'll just do this and cover this up and put it all into a box so that it can never actually irradiate anybody solutions. It's
or just buried in the
that kind of
desert
thing.
so that there are huge sections of the planet that become toxic, or so the depleted for basically mass weapon systems, or many other terrible things.
Exactly. And quick word of advice. Quick word of advice. If anybody ever offers you land in like Los Alamos, don't buy it. That thing's been nuked about 1,000 times. I'm not joking. I've seen the bloody musical that some Japanese guy did using all the bombs around the world that have been dropped that were all nukes. And more nukes have been dropped on America by America than any other country has dropped on any other country or on themselves. And we've also let England nuke America. So yeah, bully.
I know
Sorry,
it's off.
Finian.
It's off the digital prepping thing again. But while we're talking about this, let me bring up a couple important things. The Fukushima thing is an absolute disaster, and the media doesn't even talk about it anymore. It's still a disaster. I think 3 of 4 reactors completely melted down. The Japanese government completely lied about it. They lied all the way from the very beginning. In fact, a U.S. Carrier sailed into the water that was contaminated, and they were sucking that water up and desalinating it. I don't even know if that's the right term, but basically they were using that water in the ship for people to take showers. Lots of people
That was
actually
the
got
right
sick from
term.
it. all of that because the government lied about the severity of what had happened. So basically, every government is going to lie. So if one of those plants in the United States, for example, does go down or become critical, they're not going to tell you the truth at first. You're not going to hear it until it's too late. So yeah, I always tell people, again, it's not digital prepping, but it is a type of prepping. You do not want to live anywhere near a nuclear power plant or downwind or downwater from it. And that's something people today can plan for and change their lives around. You just don't want to be near one, because no matter what happens, if it's a nuclear war, an EMP, a solar flare, something that shuts down the power grid, the old GE designs, they are set up so they have, supposedly, they have two separate power sources. So like you'll have Dominion Power and Rappahannock Power. Those are the two ones in my area. So it's two different electric companies, and they'll have two separate diesel generators. And the goal, they think, is that between those four things, it will never lose power when the actual nuclear power plant is running.
I
And
saw
by
them
that,
go
they
at
mean,
once.
yeah, and what happens is things like Fukushima, where the diesel generators, of course, they lose ground power, their main power sources, and then the diesel generators get flooded out by seawater. And in the United States, most people don't even know this happened. It's not classified or anything, but there was a power plant, the typical old GE power plant design that's super dangerous because there's no way to shut them down in an emergency, and they have all this waste left over when it's done. One of those power plants lost both power sources from the grid at the same time. And that day, one of the generators had been serviced. And when the idiot that serviced it put it back together, he didn't put the oil filter back in correctly. So they powered that thing up. I swear to God, this is what happened. When they powered it up, the thing just blew up. All the fuel went all the oil went all over, and it failed. And the only thing that stopped that power plant from becoming the next Chernobyl or Fukushima was, luckily, that second diesel generator actually worked. That's it. If he had serviced both of the generators on the same day, most likely both of them would have failed. And the NRC, National Regulatory Commission, or Nuclear Regulatory Commission, they think that system, two separate power systems, which, by the way, go into the same transformers, into the same network demarcation or power demarcation at the power plant. So technically it's just one, because if that transformer system fails, then both of those power sources fail. And both of those diesel generators fail, the power plant is going to go critical, and it will do what Fukushima did. And there is no plan at all currently in the United States and any of these other countries that use these typical GE old nuclear power plant designs to replace them. They have no plan whatsoever to replace them, even though they're that susceptible to damage and going critical.
Actually, a lot of the ones in Britain, because of the criticality of the ones in other locations, have been undergoing decommissioning, and new ones are being built under some new design. I think that's come up from Japan, but from what I've heard, this design is more expensive to implement than originally built, and isn't, if I remember correctly, it's being done by a French company which underbid and now is charging a huge amount of money to try and build the plant.
Well, in France, everybody knows, it's like all nuclear. France wouldn't have any electricity if it wasn't for their nuclear power plants. So yeah, I stand corrected. I know for a fact, though, that the United States is not replacing their plants. So they have ones like the one near me. Yeah, Lake Anna, there was an earthquake on August 23rd in 2011 in my area, and that plant had to emergency shut down. And again, if all of those
really,
yeah, it had to. And if all the systems weren't in place that needed to be, it would have failed. And they had leaking barrels of radioactive waste just sitting out in the open air in a field. That's like right next to me. It's like 1.5 hours away. So yeah, this stuff is not being taken care of well. So like I said, don't live near one if you can help it.
And you say that that's not related to digital prepping, but to me that's like the impetus for digital prepping. So that's my take on that.
Do you know how often they test that to make sure everything's working properly?
They don't. They just don't care, man. The inspections don't get done the way they should. The standards are super low. it's a complete mess. And these plants have been running for 30 or 40 years. Like we were saying earlier, they're super old. The design's terrible. It's dangerous to begin with. And at least in the U.S., there's no plan to replace them.
Do you guys remember the report that came out? I don't know. It was probably about 6 or 7 years ago. It was from the there was an independent team that was hired to basically inspect the U.S. power grid, and they came up with their recommendations, and I guess their recommendations were basically blown off. And when they realized that the recommendations had been blown off, they decided to go ahead and find somebody who would basically champion, kind of get the attention of, some of the key players. And so they basically made a plea for, the reasons why the U.S. Power grid was not nearly as secure as everybody had been, stating for many years. And they came out with a list, and I want to say it hit somewhere between like 60 and 70% of all the electric power producers in the U.S. Had basically failed their redundancy testing. And basically, they said that if the infrastructure was not fixed by a certain year, that it was going to, we were going to start to see rolling brownouts, and we were going to start to see, different things like that. I know that this isn't really digital prepping, but when you don't have electricity, you don't really have.
You don't have digital.
Yeah. So I thought that was kind of interesting. You understand that I have always been a person that pays attention to bad news before I pay attention to any other news. And so that was something that was going around. What I didn't do is really, keep track of where they were on that. But I wasn't sure if anybody else had any further information. And since we were on that subject, maybe somebody could speak to it.
I know that separate from the nuclear power thing, I know the electric grid just in general by itself is very susceptible to attack. We have a very small amount of points of failure that if those were taken out, and it's like, near a handful, then the entire United States would be without power for like 2 years.
Yeah, our grid is heavily centralized in the States. I don't know about Britain's, to be honest. I don't think it's quite as easy as that, because there's a wide range of sources for power. They will use anything that works, basically, in Britain. Gas network's been around for decades, centuries probably, more like. The electricity systems, in various forms, yeah. And electricity can be provided via a number of different means over here. They're moving more towards renewables, obviously. Everybody bloody is. But and they are actually doing a lot of development in Britain to increase the efficiency of things for solar. Like some inventor or engineer basically managed to find a way over here to increase the efficiency of solar cells from 20% to 60% absorption rates, which obviously is a huge benefit to anybody who's actually trying to build a solar site.
Elon Musk did.
No, it wasn't an Elon Musk thing. It was a British college that found this one, if I'm not mistaken. I can't remember which one. It was either that or Scottish. But to be fair, they up top north, they really do make a lot of good inventions. Most of the stuff, including like the U.S. Navy, was invented by the Scottish. So they've got a chip on their shoulder, and I don't know why, because they've got a very good history of inventing, and I wish they would use some of that critical thinking that they had in the past so that they could capitalize.
So, and I think this ties. Go ahead.
Even if they made the efficiency better, I didn't think England got enough sunlight to make solar viable.
You wouldn't be saying that if you'd been here for the past month and a half, mate. We've only had 2 days where it's rained. Now, granted, it's been monsoons when it did rain, but for the entire summer, we have pretty much had just blue skies.
So just to tie this somewhat back, I would say that would be why the state wants as many people on the grid as possible, and why they won't let them off. Because, not only does it provide a dependency cycle, but it means that if there ever is a collapse, everybody has a vested interest in it, even the people that do have a problem with the government. So they'd probably be all gung-ho for the power to come back on so they could keep on Netflix binging and shit. So I would think that would be, like, in terms of that, a really good reason to get off the grid and to maybe form neighborhood grids of your own power, your own septic, etc., and maybe start to do that on a general level so that the world can gradually decentralize. So I guess a good way to follow that rant up would be to ask, in your personal home, how much of your power and digital footprint is decentralized versus anything else?
Okay, so for me, what I have is I have a solar backup to basically provide me power for what I consider to be the most vital functions of my home. Okay, now I'm working on a completely off the power grid solar battery bank for my freezer. The reason being is because I try to put about a year's worth of meat in the freezer come around hunting season. I've not been successful at doing that every year because I get called away and I'm not able to always go on some of the hunting trips that I had planned. But I do try to fill the freezer, and have a solar battery backup would be perfect. I'm going to use marine grade batteries, and it won't take that many solar panels. I'm going to start with something that's kind of low cost, rather than running out and paying somebody $25,000 to build it for me. My father-in-law actually has quite a bit of knowledge on solar power, and as soon as their latest family crisis is dealt with, our plan is for him to come out and go over what it is I'm going to put together. But it starts with buying marine grade batteries. The bigger marine batteries are the better ones. The smaller ones that actually are for a boat are they don't have a warranty that's very long. The best warranty I've seen on marine grade batteries so far has been 1 year, and that's not very long. And so you can see how that would be really expensive if you had batteries go out and then you end up losing your freezer. So what I want is a system that runs solar, uses the battery backup for the solar, and if there's a failure of one of the batteries, it switches to site power as a backup. So, it's sort of like using the government's power as the backup rather than using the solar as the backup. I want to have it run on solar most of the time. Now, I will tell you, as far as code is concerned, that is not kosher. No one is going to approve that for a build. So that'll be something that I'll have to do at risk. And then the other thing that I also consider to be even more of a vital survival method is lights. I absolutely positively have to have lights. I don't have natural night vision, and so not saying lights as in power lights inside for the house, but lights as far as flashlights, weapon lights, different things like that are crucial. And so what I've done is I've slowly taken all of those lights and transitioned them to where all of them can be powered by batteries that I can recharge by way of solar, and I have solar panels to do that. I have 3 different ways to do that. One is just at the home. The second one is from my vehicle, if something were to go wrong and I'm in my vehicle. And then the third is I have a backpack version that will allow me to at least recharge the most basic of batteries that I use for lights.
Well, and on that level, do you have any of those lanterns that you can just leave in the sun all day and then have power when it gets dark?
I've seen those lanterns. Are you talking about like the outside lighting kind, or are you talking about an actual lantern?
They're portable. They have a handle on the top.
Right. Okay, so I've seen those. Goal Zero is probably some of the best solar, as far as products are concerned. Not to plug anyone over another, but Goal Zero is what I've had the most experience with. I have 2 or 3 Goal Zeros, and then I have a ton of their batteries. So I do use them. In fact, I'm using one right now because I'm looking for a pin that fell on the floor, and so I'm using my flashlight. But those are great batteries. They do last quite a few times. They do take quite a few recharges, and so I can honestly tell you that I've definitely leveraged them and see them as the best solution as far as flashlight batteries. Those are great. I do have lanterns, but I use the Siege from Streamlight. I have the D cell version that I keep in my vehicle, and then I keep a AAA or a AA version in my bag. It's kind of like my go everywhere with me bag.
We have a new patron on Patreon, so thank you, Apollo. And deep thank you also. He's donating more than anybody else now. So I'll get you your patron rewards as soon as I can. That'll probably be within the next week. Additionally, why don't you go into some detail on the range there? On the range of your lights, I'm saying.
Oh, sure. So for just small everyday use, I carry a it's called an S1R baton that's made by Olight. That's really my everyday. I take that with me everywhere. It's in my pocket at all times, unless maybe I'm in the swimming pool or something. And then I have a small or a larger version of it that is the baton. It's a baton, just slightly larger, and it uses two battery, the 18650 battery. It's just one, and the reason I like that is because that light uses the same battery as the light on my primary carbine. And so I like having the interoperability between the weapon lights that I have mounted on my weapons, which are predominantly Streamlight. I have Streamlight for practically everything. I think that it's the poor man's Surefire. And then I like the Olights. I have sent them back. I have had one go bad on me, and I've had to send it back. But for the most part, I've had really good luck with them. Their batteries are pretty good. And then I like the rechargeable version. And I have a house power version of a recharger. And then I have one that I can actually plug into a solar panel and recharge them. As far as throw is concerned, I try to match the weapon light or the throw, if you will, of the light. I try to match it to what I would expect as far as an engagement would be. And so my primary carbine has like about 1,050 lumen, which uses an 18650, and that's a Streamlight. And then I have the little brother to it, which is about a 650 lumen, and that's on what I use for a house gun, which is essentially an 8.5 inch AR pistol, which I think is excellent if you're having to clear a house. It's perfect. I use match grade ammo in it so that it has the maximum effect, but the least likelihood of going wall to wall to wall. You know, green tip might not be a good idea for inside your house. And so I try to match the light to the capability, and then I try to match the batteries to have interoperability from one flashlight to the next, because, you know, the second that you have one flashlight go bad, you'll have another one where the batteries aren't any good, but the flashlight that is bad but the batteries are good won't work in the flashlight that's good but the batteries went bad. And so interoperability is an important thing. So if you have an 18650 flashlight, okay, which is, it's kind of like a little bit longer version of a AA battery, just a little bit bigger, maybe about 40% bigger than a AA battery in length and in diameter. But it's a good battery, and you can get pretty decent rechargeable versions of it. So what I like about that one is that if you have an 18650 light, and for whatever reason that battery goes dead and you don't have a replacement for it, or maybe it's charging, if you have the CR123s or the RCR 123s, which are the rechargeable versions, if you put two of those in place of one 18650, it will still work. You might not get the full output, and in some cases, if you do get the full output, you just might get a reduced life on the light. But the point is at least you have something to be able to see with. My weapons lights are not, unlike Hollywood, where people run around in caves with their lights on the whole time. The idea of having a weapon light is not to turn it on and walk around and tell everybody where you are. The idea of a weapon light is just to identify what it is you're about to shoot. And I think that if you're going to have a firearm for self-defense, that includes nighttime. And if you're going to have one for nighttime, then you need to have a light to be able to identify what you shoot, or else it might be your teenage son coming through a window. And I do have some experience in this.
Yeah, I'm showing my camera again because of something, another tip that's important here. I have red filters on all of my weapon lights. And if you're interior inside your house and somebody that might be an enemy of yours is outside your house, or you're in a structure and you don't want people outside to necessarily see you as well while you're clearing rooms, you should have a red filter actually on your light. And basically it changes it. That's going to kill you, of course, but it changes it from white to red. And when you're inside of a structure and somebody is outside looking in, seeing red light moving room to room is much more difficult than a white light, of course, because white light's going to blind everybody, including yourself. So it's just, if you're not using IR and night vision, which is a whole nother thing to talk about, and it's super expensive, so a lot of people aren't going to have it. But at the very least, it's like a poor man's night vision, because if you're clearing a room and you're not wanting to give everybody your position, then you want to be doing it with a red light interior. And that way people outside can't see you as well, and you can still identify your target. And, you know, the little lens caps that go on these lights are super cheap, and you can get the red lens filter for super cheap as well. Just something to think about, because for your rifles, you want something like that to keep yourself more low key and not seen from literally miles away, depending on what your position is and what you're doing.
I agree. I think that's a really good idea. Those IR filters are great. And just one last thing that I wanted to tag on to the Olight that I really like about them is they have, if you hold the button down, it goes to what's called moonlight. And it is so barely visible that it literally looks like it just might be a flicker of moonlight. But I like it because if you set it to that, every time you turn the flashlight on, that's the only setting it'll come to until you actually hold it down for, you know, the 1.5 second or 2 second on the switch. And then it'll switch back over to a brighter light. And I like the moonlight just simply because it's really, really low And so if, say you were to set something down and then you're saying, oh crap, I need to find that again, you can hit that in Moonlight. It also is helpful for if you were looking at a map, everybody knows that, military maps are red light readable, but you might not have a red light readable map. And so having that Moonlight is kind of a nice function. It also helps save your night vision. Same reason with the red lights that's also another good idea. I know I'm probably getting into the weeds here, but when you ask me about flashlights, understand that you're practically asking me about my Lord and Savior Jesus. So I'm going to tell you a lot more than what you initially asked.
And it's a very deep topic too. Like we could talk about weapon lighting and stuff like that all night long.
And actually, I want to get broader into weapon lighting next Sunday. So,
okay.
Well, one quick thing. He mentioned Surefire and Streamlight and stuff like that. My rifles have Surefires on them, and the main reason for that is, yes, they're way more expensive, but you can get the cheaper versions. The reason why I use them, though, is because they're designed for the vibrations and the difficulty that a rifle puts the light under. So basically, the light's going to keep working when the rifle's firing, and it's not going to fail. A cheaper light, the LED circuitry and stuff like that, is more susceptible to that type of vibration and the movement that happens when a gun fires, and it's going to break. So if you can afford it, make sure you go for the higher quality lights.
I was going to make a
Surefire's
mention.
customer service is amazing. Also, I have one on my pistol, and I need to get a red filter now that you're talking about this, because it's a 400 lumen light and it's bright as hell. And yeah, now that I'm thinking about it, so learn something again. And all right, go on.
Yeah, I would say that as far as Surefire and Streamlight, probably those two are probably the standard in my opinion.
Absolutely.
Outside of there's a lot of just cheap ass lights that you can find in places like Cheaper Than Dirt. And you can even find them on Amazon. And what I would say is avoid them. If you absolutely positively cannot afford to get either a Streamlight or a Surefire, then get the most expensive cheap light that you can and test it. Take it out to the range, turn it on and shoot. It doesn't matter whether it's daytime or nighttime. Turn it on, shoot it a bunch. If you can get 500 rounds through the pistol with the light on and not have any issues with the circuitry, then maybe you found an anomaly in inexpensive lights. But other than that, I agree. If you've got a $10 head, wear a $10 helmet.
Exactly.
That and optics as well. Don't cheap out on optics because they will break.
We're slipping into the physical prepping section,
I'm sorry,
guys. Actually,
I told you
kind
it
of
would
more
happen.
than slipped. yes, you warned
They
us.
use electricity.
I do
There's
swan
electricity
dives.
involved.
Yeah.
But you can buy those lights and optics with Bitcoin.
Yeah, there you go.
There we go.
And there we go.
or like Aaron said, Monero. But on that level, how about you, Shane? What is your prepping look like on a digital level? Do you have anything in your house that you've sort of future proofed in the case of collapse?
Not really. The only thing that I've really done is very, very molecule size invested in Bitcoin. But in terms of like electric and all that, I live in an apartment, so it's I don't know if it's like impossible, but I haven't really thought about it that much. I guess because I'm a zombie. But but it's interesting to hear everyone talk about their backup plan when we're talking about the collapse and all that, because it really goes to show that they have this mindset that things are going to happen, and I definitely can understand that mindset. But my main thing that I want to ask is, what is the like when we're talking about all the was it li-fi, I believe, or lo-fi?
Li-fi.
Li-fi. is that like a kind of like the internet? Is that like another way of like internet or something like
It's
that? Or am I
kind of
way
it's
off?
closer to you're a little bit off on that, but that is another good thing to bring up. Li-Fi is comparable to something like fiber optic cabling
Okay.
in that it uses light to transmit information. It is a system. It's like a Wi-Fi router. It just routes it using light rather than a wireless radio signal at a specific frequency. And because it uses light, it has much more of a frequency to play with. You can send a lot more data with pure light than you can with a radio wave. That's why fiber optic systems tend to be extremely powerful. And there is one company in Britain which does it, and that's Virgin. I don't use them. However, they boast the largest speeds in Britain. They like guarantee something like 80 megasecond at least, and I think you can max out at 300 or something on that. Li-Fi, you'd be looking at gigabit minimum.
Yeah, I'm going to ask the dumbest question of the night. Does this thing work at night?
It works as long as you've got the lights on.
Oh, no thanks. Okay.
So I
if
guess
you turn the lights off, then it won't work. Simple as that.
so.
Yeah,
If it
see,
works,
that wouldn't work for me because it drives my wife crazy. But I like to walk around my house at night in the dark, and so aside from maybe having a laptop or using the Wi-Fi on my phone, I pretty much am in the dark, and it drives my wife crazy all the time. She's like, turn the light on. But, for me, it's just continual practice to know where everything is in the house and how to walk around it if you practice it at night.
To be fair, Skip, I'm just talking about a pure Li-Fi system. There's no reason why somebody couldn't develop a Li-Fi to Wi-Fi device, for example. I mean, for crying out loud, there are devices now that can turn your entire electricity grid into a Wi-Fi hotspot, as long as you have access to an ISP.
Well, and I thought that's what you meant, because there's multiple different types of currently fiber optic light-based networks, and one of the types of networks is called FTC, fiber to cabinet.
Yeah.
And it's where the fiber goes to a cabinet and then is routed into copper cabling that goes through the neighborhood on a DSL system. So
yeah, that's what most of the BT network runs on.
That's what most networks run on, because it's hugely expensive to run fiber to total communities. Like the only people who really get anything different are those who have housing near business complexes, or like live on a campus of a university or a military base, or some other place where you live on site and where you work. Because it's hugely inefficient to do it otherwise. And so you could do something similar here, where you would have a receiver of the essentially, if I understand it correctly, essentially the laser with the information on it, and that would catch that and push it into a system which could even, by that same token, run that through fibers and then to cabinets, and it'd still be faster than fiber being strung all the way across like major oceans and fucking things like that, if they could work it properly.
Yeah, very true. But the only thing is you can't get the maximum out of it. So you could run a laser. What you could do is run, say, a laser system from. Well, I'm just looking at like my room. You could run it from one wall across, and then use a mirror to shoot it down into a receiver, which would then have an optic cable to feed into your laptop, for example, or your desktop system. And that would then give you full access to the entire system via laser beam. You just have to get the positioning right.
Well, but what I was saying is, like, because people don't really need huge speeds. Most people aren't serving that much data, much less receiving that much data. But if they had the data transmitted across the majority of the network faster, it would make the small transition to the cabling much less slow, and it would make the data transfers still like lightning quick compared to what they are now, even if at the end user experience it was coming through copper.
We want big data though. We want the most bandwidth possible, and that would allow, for example, every single individual home could be a separate node for Bitcoin or something like that.
Precisely.
Yeah,
Oh,
you
yeah.
want to have
want as much
terabit
time
transfer speeds as soon
Right.
as possible for
Well,
everybody, because then
and
everybody
you
can be an
could.
ISP.
And you could
That's the other thing.
theoretically, but you would also then need to have some sort of setup where these people would be accountable, where these people's data wouldn't be infringing on other people's data. So it would be
That's what the
interesting.
blockchain's for.
It would
Yeah,
be
it already
interesting.
does that. Yep.
It would be interesting to see how this transition to a decentralized network, or if it even could, with the government's stranglehold on data currently. And in
Well-
terms of prepping, I think it's valuable to remember that a network like this would need a completely trusted network of people involved before it did anything to serve anyone's interests.
I have a question that I want
Go
to
ahead.
ask you guys. How does net neutrality play into all this?
It needs to be abolished immediately.
Yeah.
With
It's-
without any with extreme prejudice, as far as I'm concerned.
It's
Yeah, I
net
would
neutrality
counter
that's
that.
going to halt any progress to any of these things because it
Yep.
will create inequality, and they can use net neutrality as a marketing device to say why all this stuff that we're talking about needs to stop.
It's already created inequality because technically, I know that ISPs were trying to find ways of abusing the system. I'm not trying to forgive them in any way, shape, or form. However, thanks to net neutrality, big companies like Google and whatnot have basically been able to rest on their laurels since net neutrality. They have rested on their laurels with their products because they don't have to pay as much. They don't cost as much to run now because they aren't being charged the same way as they were by the ISPs to serve those products. And because of this, they're able to just basically cut corners and also dictate how we all are supposed to think, speak, and everything else, which just drives me up the wall. But it's those cutting of corners that are ruining a lot of their services. It's creating bad algorithms, using like shit tons of bugs in social network products, data breaches left, right, and center. There is good reason why Facebook and Twitter are both tanking in the stock market.
Right.
And it's not something that is that needs a rocket scientist to explain. You get what you sow, you will reap. And if you basically reap a lot of annoyance from people, you're going to lose customers. It's just a given.
One of the main problems we have today is the internet as we know it is controlled by the governments. And one of the things we're talking about tonight, of course, is we need to find an alternative to that so that the governments no longer control the internet. We need to create an internet, basically, that does not depend on the nodes that are run by government services. And actually, not just run, they're controlled and filtered and scanned, and they look for certain content. All that needs to go away.
Well,
And we need as much
Well,
bandwidth as possible and being off grid as possible so that those individual nodes can't be shut down. And with blockchain technology, everybody's data is verified basically. So you can still do transactions financially, you can verify data. And today we have current technology that makes this possible. It's just not implemented. That's the main problem.
So it must have been a problem
it-
then when corporations such as Verizon and Comcast and all those other ones were, whether they were forced to or not, they were supporting net neutrality and all of that, even though it would hurt their business.
Well, it doesn't hurt their business. That's the point. It makes it harder for anybody else to join that market. That helps their business because it reduces competition. And Finian, you're right. We do need something else. Thankfully, it is in the works. I don't know if any of you have heard of Web 3.0.
Yeah, certainly.
Because this is basically Web 2.0 was when I don't know how many of you know the history of the internet, but basically, when it first came out, they thought that 1.0, they thought they had enough addresses for everybody on the internet to use. And then sometime, I think around, well, I was still in university when they were talking about 2.0. So it had to be sometime around like 2000, before 2007. They started running out of internet addresses to actually host websites. So they had to come up with a new interface, and they called it Web 2.0 because it would require a reworking of most of the web, because it reworked how IP addresses worked in general. It gave them more bits to play with in the TCP/IP protocols, and that allowed the internet to grow massively, and it still has huge amounts of room to grow. However, it didn't decentralize the internet. The decentralized internet, as I understand it, the closest fit that you could have is, imagine all the peer-to-peer systems that exist today being the hosts of the internet. Because peer-to-peer technology is basically a decentralized platform for hosting of data. So why not build a protocol over that service to support the data? And that automatically integrates a huge number of security features as well, because there are people like iBlocklist and a number of other institutions that have that you can pay to give you block lists for any of the government IPs out there. There are lists all over the internet of what IPs basically are going to try and track you. And these can insta-block all of them. They can also really muck up a lot of your internet usage if you use them all the time, but if you're using them for P2P work, then it's not too bad. And if you know specific IPs that you need to block, then as long as they don't change them, you will be secure from them. It's this kind of principle that allows a peer-to-peer network the ability to continue running without government interference. And like you guys highlighted, the more you can take away from government control, the more we all win.
Right. Yeah. And, on that level, there's also a lot of VPNs that you can turn on and off. There's also a lot of personal firewalls that you can set up that block activities similar to government snooping. There are a lot of ways to set this up if you are tech savvy at all, but there are also many ways to set this up that aren't. Like, I can't recommend Proton VPN enough, and it also comes with encrypted email. But there's also plenty of these other solutions for this sort of thing that'll keep you basically more private. And I would recommend everybody try as many of these as they can. At least try them. You don't have to keep it once it's on your computer. It's not like you've signed in blood and there's a ritual that got completed. You can just keep this for as long as it helps you, or as long as you want to test and see if it helps you, and you can just throw it away if it doesn't. It's not like it's permanent, and it's not like there's anything you have to lose except a little bit of time maybe. Also, I wanted to say, and people can respond to what I just said after that, thank you to Simeon, the free range human, for having donated to my Patreon as well at the $2 level. Thank you. But anyway, anybody can respond to what I just said if you want, or you can bring up another topic related to this general subject.
Yeah. So VPNs, as well as the Tor network, it's not going to make you completely private and completely immune to being tracked or whatnot, but it'll make it a lot more arduous to do it. And that's something that anybody can do. And it's very important. VPNs that are not based in countries with an agreement with the Five Eyes, like say British Virgin Islands is a good one.
It
Yeah.
depends on what you're trying to do as well, because I mean, say take me for example. In Britain, we are a bit limited, and I think a lot of people don't actually realize just how much involvement there is now on the internet. I mean, okay, yeah, our speech laws here are just they're just a fucking joke now. But that aside,
Right,
we also
the
have
Meacham and Robinson situations.
Meacham, Robinson, bloody some poor woman who basically complained in Speaker's Corner got arrested the next day.
And
For
Lauren Southern's just
breach of the
banned.
peace.
Hey,
Yeah, Lauren
Lupinate,
Southern banned for being a conservative.
Lupinate, is that somebody at your door?
Very funny.
You've said the wrong word, sir. Report to the nearest education plant.
Yeah, report for re-education immediately.
Have you got your wrong word license?
Oh, you got a license for those words?
You cheeky cunt.
Oh man, I really wish that I could laugh ironically at this, but I can't because it's funny because it's true.
Yeah, one day soon, just being in this hangout with us will probably be illegal.
You're gonna need a
Oh,
permit for
mate,
that.
they're trying. They're trying. I'm not joking. They are trying to ban people who are activists from becoming politically or able to run for political office.
Well, and also
So-
like
That's crazy.
and also in that front, I mean, you're talking to somebody right now who is well known for associating with militant communists and militant right wing people. So like, there's pretty much no safety if the government did decide to crack down on association. You're unsafe at this point, so you're in for a penny, in for a pound.
Yeah, and I'll just have to argue you can't say somebody's guilty because they talk to somebody else.
Well, you
Otherwise,
can
you're talking
say
to me,
it.
therefore you're guilty. Well, you
I
can
would
say
just-
it, but then you implicate yourself in the same time.
I would
In the
just-
United States, they can arrest you and hold you indefinitely and never charge you with a crime now.
Yeah,
It's
that's-
like, they
well,
can do anything
that-
they
Oh
want.
yeah, I know they
Well,
can,
that-
but why do you think
that's
I'm in
been-
Britain?
Well, but that particular thing's been the case since the Patriot
2012.
Act, effectively. And well, no, since the Patriot
NDAA
Act.
2012 made it.
Patriot
it-
Act codified similar things as long as they can tie it to terror. NDAA just meant that they could tie it to a broader range of terror-linked suspects. So, I mean, the NDAA basically just expanded it. The Patriot Act was there long before that, and the Smith Act was long there before. Well,
True.
I mean,
there were other acts there before
Yeah,
that
and the Alien and
basically
Sedition
violated all
Act
this.
and all that.
right. Well, and the Smith Act is especially bad because it means that I have to preface every time I want to talk about revolution with, things like, obviously I'm not suggesting anything similar to that, because if I just outright suggested revolution would be a positive thing in this environment, they could literally strip me of my citizenship and treat me like an illegal alien, and throw me in an illegal prison. A
You
dark
shouldn't
site.
say
They
it.
could- What?
Mate, if I'm honest, the way the liberal media is, if we ever do wind up becoming properly famous, then saying those things will be taken out of context, and they will do everything they can to lambast you.
Yeah, but they're already going to take me out of context, and they're already going to use context-free statements anyway. I mean, they're calling me a Nazi furry. There's only so much you can go.
They got you.
Oh my
They
god.
found you out.
Clearly, they figured it out.
So I'm
They know your secret.
see. So there's only so much you can do, and I'm not going to bite my tongue because some punk-ass little bitch is going to report me to the feds. Fuck that. I'm not going to
Good
live my
for
life
you.
like that.
Good for you. I've got to be
think-
careful only because I don't want to have to run to the embassy. I really don't.
Right.
That
Well,
that,
and-
that is
okay.
basically my bug out plan
And-
at the
and
moment.
on
if
that-
shit really does hit the fan.
And on that
How's your
level,
freedom
like,
of
what do
speech
you
over
do
there?
to secure yourself over there? Like that'd be an interesting thing to know for this prepping thing.
Well, there are a few routes. If you've got money, which at the moment I'm a little bit low on, you can. They're expanding in the find there's an app basically that you can get private security with. For about £200 a month, they'll protect your property and your street, kind of thing. They use it currently up in the high-end areas of London, Belgravia, Kensington, those sorts of places, and it's got very good conviction rates. Basically, when the first I heard reported them, they had 400 cases and they had closed 400 cases successfully. So everybody they've arrested has actually committed the crime. Whereas that is not going to be the case in most police arrests. You're going to get a lot of cases thrown out of court due to lack of evidence, due to basically some sort of failure in the process. And these guys have beaten that hands down. Nobody can boast that kind of record normally. So it's almost too good to be true. But given the fact that they're being paid directly under contract, I don't think it is that unlikely. I think that having that kind of success rate is what you would expect as a standard from private security if you were going to hire it. Now, from my perspective, I've got the cheaper man's option. We use a security provider. So someone like ADT. They'll install an alarm system in your house that will have panic systems as well. They have a direct contract with the local police that will force them into basically help us on their behalf. And because they are a multinational company, they actually have a bit of influence on these sorts of things. And although they aren't used as widely around for public infrastructure, they are very used heavily privately over here. It's one of the most common systems around, but it's it's currently being, if I'm not mistaken, it's a wireless system. It uses GPRS as the main communication network. It has access to every single network provider, so it will not lose signal, whereas previous alarm systems that we had would constantly go off if BT were mucking about with our phone lines. This one will never do that because it basically has about 8 or 9 different networks it can fall back on if one of them fails. So unless all of them fail, the network, ADT will not have a problem with their alarm systems.
Okay, and just a couple
great.
Just a couple injections here. First off, we have a question in chat that for the name of the mobile app you were discussing.
Oh God, I keep wanting to say it's Find My Bobby. Hang on, let me have a look.
Okay. And additionally, there's a service called Pyramid Wi-Fi that you can carry around this little device to secure any network, and then you connect to that through the network, and it prevents any sort of tampering with your computer leading to any sort of tampering with the network. And it's basically much more secure than a VPN, and it acts like a VPN but better. And this isn't sponsored by Pyramid. And this isn't sponsored by Pyramid, by the way. Anybody who wants to go check it out can realize they don't have a referral program yet, though. If they did, I would sign up immediately because it's a great little device and you can carry it anywhere. But I would recommend if you are trying to digitally prep to have something like that, and it fits in your pocket, dude. It's awesome. What were you gonna say?
All right, I found it. It's called the website is mylocalbobby.co.uk. Bobby, as in the British cop Bobby. You can basically, to be quite frank, it looks like a fairly straightforward sales site, but it's the news articles that I've read from like the Mail and the Standard. They are, here we go. Drizzly night in Belgravia and the streets are deserted. A cab pulls up before Eaton Square's stuccoed columns. The passenger in the back is meters from a door, but drenched in De Beers and toting a $10,000 handbag, she doesn't feel safe walking the distance alone. Thankfully, she and her neighbors have their own immaculately turned out private policeman on speed dial to escort them safely home. An ex-copper or soldier who keeps an eye on their properties all day and who, should an incident occur, has the power to arrest the perpetrator and launch his or her own investigation. I mean, this is the kind of service. And from, let's see, the standard fee, 50 quid per month. Enhanced fee, 100 quid per month. And then you can get a special fee, which is, I think it's price on ask, POA. So it doesn't give you a price for this one, but that one gives you basically everything you could ever ask for. The £100 service gives you the standard plus experienced detectives for personal cases, personal cyber assessment, cyber penetrations testing services, and access to a city law firm.
Oh, but come on. This
That's all
has
fine
to
and
be a
dandy,
lie.
because-
This has to be a lie because I mean, who would provide for security in an anarchist society?
This is
Well-
the point. This is why I love London. It isn't, or Britain, to be fair, because it is insane. It has the elements to basically be an agorist society, and yet it keeps basically defaulting to the state. And
So, what were you going to
Well,
say though,
I don't
Finian,
get it.
before you forget?
I go back to the beginning when we were introducing ourselves. I am a residential security expert, and I do not, and I repeat, do not recommend people in the United States using third-party monitored alarm systems. And he lives in a place where you do not have to fear the police responding and shooting your dog or your child. And in the United States, you do have to be concerned about that. So, for all the people listening to this that are in the United States, do not get a third-party alarm system.
And
I
remember,
highly
the police
recommend-
are more likely to kill you than a terrorist is.
Yes, and in the news, actually, on nation level, they've had multiple stories lately, like where a guy defends himself from an armed invasion, and then the cops come and shoot him instead.
yep,
You are way more dangerous in the United States for having a third-party monitored system, because the way those work is they will bypass and send that system call to the police, and the police respond to your house whether you want them to or not. And if it's a false alarm, the best case scenario is you will be fined for a false alarm. The worst case scenario is it's your teenage son or your dog or something that's going to end up getting shot and killed.
Well, and
So
and
do not
also,
do it.
by the way, psychologically speaking, I read a study a while back. I think it's 60 to 70% of potential thieves have looked at a sign on the front and just walked away. And so they were considering, and they had committed crimes at other properties. And I forget, I'll find the
Yeah.
link if I can.
No,
but
no, no,
they had committed crimes at other properties, and they thought about committing crimes at places with signs, and they didn't, even if the sign was to a non-existent security company. So the sign is a good enough deterrent for most people.
it is.
It has to be
I
a
cannot.
legitimate
It does have to be a legitimate company usually, and it has to at least have some sort of interactiveness to show that it is part of the alarm system kind of thing. But those signs alone often drive people away. We've basically, this house did get robbed once before I ever came here. And ever since then, there's been an alarm system of some description on the property. On occasion, that alarm system was never actually working. It just basically would go off and not alert anybody. Just
And do you have external
would
cameras,
go
by
off
the way?
into the system. I do not at the moment, to be fair. But again, I'm not entirely certain how much is going to be in the ADT system off the top of my head, because it isn't installed yet. I'm still waiting for that bit to happen.
So
But
here, when they install it, they have internal access to all your cameras, which is bad. I don't recommend any external cameras that are accessed by a third party because you have huge privacy issues and you do not control the data. You don't control the data. So what
No.
Jeremiah was mentioning is all of your entrance cameras should be on a type of system like the Kuna Light. It is KUNA, and you control the data and you have access, and
Yes.
it's only facing external. So your entrance cameras are always recorded so that whether it's a state agent or a criminal at that door, you have a record of it basically. And then you should have a separate system internal to your home that's on a DVR, a wired, non-wireless system, and only you control it. Do not give that to a third-party company, because when you do that, they control it.
See,
And then
the
in
thing
addition to
is I
that, you
don't.
should have hidden cameras.
You've got to remember, mate, GDPR. The problem is that every company for everything that is data related now falls under GDPR. So, if anything, there's probably a legal requirement for that data to be ours by default once the system is installed. Even though they're the ones who control everything on their side, they will have to ask us for permission to use that footage with police and things like that as part of the contract. Now, to be quite frank, over here, like you said, it's not as big a problem, but back in the States, it is. And to be quite frank, over here, you can't really walk the street without being on camera. You guys don't have this in the States really at all, except maybe in places like New York and LA. But in London, if you're in the city, you are pretty much perma-tracked. If somebody wants to follow you on CCTV camera, they can, because every single company has a CCTV camera inside their building. They have it outside their building. The government themselves have installed certain cameras for the police themselves. They are everywhere.
Well,
This is why crimes get solved quickly here to a large extent, because there's video evidence of it happening.
Let me just say some things. First off, Shane, you have to leave, so why don't you tell people where you can be found and what you do, and everybody be sure to go check out the Hapa Supremacy show on YouTube. And additionally, like, we'll get back to it, but there's a question in chat for Finian as to how much your a security system like the one you advise would be, and so you can think about that while they're plugging their shit.
Yeah, sorry guys, but thanks again for having me, and it was a lot of information, and it was a great learning experience. So thank you again for that. But yeah, you can find me on Twitter at Shane Scalf and on YouTube at Hapa Supremacy.
And how would you spell those?
ShaneScalph, and then Hapa Supremacy, HapaSupremacy. I'll put it in the chat so that people can find it and all that.
Very cool.
So, yeah. So again, thanks a lot, guys, and have a good stream.
Have a good night, man. Thanks for making
Cheers, mate. Good night, mate.
Nice meeting you.
You too.
See you.
So the question in the chat for you, Finian, was how much would a security system like the one you mentioned cost in your estimation?
Yeah, I replied in chat, but it's basically about $1,000. And for some people, basically that's a lot of money, but you can work on it incrementally. I would do your I call them entrance cameras, but basically any place in your house where you're going in and out on a regular basis, your back door, your front door, you want a camera that records those coming and going. And those cameras, since they're outward facing, they can be wireless, they can be on the internet. You don't have to worry about them being hacked because it's not like it's in a private space of your home. And they're super cheap. You can get them on Amazon. You know, the Kunas run for under $190 basically. It's like under $200. And you'll get all kinds of great features. It announces when someone comes to your door. You can have automated responses to it. And of course, it records it.
And like, I can't emphasize this enough. multiple things. First off, just on an interest level, the technical term for this for all those veterans and tactical people out there would be points of ingress and egress. So if you ever read a manual and they talk about that, they're talking about like basically what Finian just mentioned. But there's also like you could set up a burner phone as a camera that would be relatively discreet, because those things you can fit anywhere. You can use them as bugs effectively, monitoring the audio and video of any room, and they have a low footprint on that level for generally not that much overhead in terms of like data usage, whatever you're talking about. And most people won't look twice at a phone because they won't think, hey, there's a camera pointed at me. They're very used to thinking about terms like, big ass cameras, and they're thinking it's going to be like a movie, because most criminals are profoundly stupid. And so there's also the fact that, for instance, I've been playing Watch Dogs a lot lately. And while it's not exactly like that yet in terms of the CTOS system, it's getting there. And if you want to stop criminals, yeah, sure, ADT might be a good thing to have. But if you want to stop government, the single largest group of criminals, the most sophisticated group, ADT is going to be basically a direct line to them. So that's something to remember.
I am way more worried about police responding to my house than I am a random criminal.
Well, right, and you should be. Terrorists are more likely to kill them, and they're basically terrorists themselves, so.
I'll be honest, when it comes to things like cameras, security systems, nothing's secure.
Right.
Nothing will be ever 100% secure. This is something we're going to have to start coming to terms with pretty damn quick, even with things, unless we get quantum encryption. That's probably the only thing that could make something perfectly secure, because if you try and tap the data and you don't have the quantum key, then it won't work. You'll just get garbage, and the entire message will be destroyed basically in the process.
It gets back to Sam's message in his question actually in chat. There are multiple levels. Like, I always meant to write a Steemit post about this because it's so complicated, but I just never got around to doing it. But you should have multiple layers to your camera defenses. And I already mentioned one. All your entrances should have cameras on them. And you control that data. It's you can have the ones that are online that have all the fancy, special apps to them that you can access from your smartphone. You can talk to people back and forth from them. Those are fine. But inside of your house, all that system, every system inside your house should be wireless and not accessed or hackable from the internet. And you can have basically, I recommend people have a separate DVR system with wired cameras. And those cameras are not in any private area. They're not in your bathrooms. They're not in people's bedrooms. They're all your common areas. One of them should be facing your entrances in a way that when those doors open, the lighting does not blind them. And in addition to those cameras, you should have hidden cameras. So like what you were just talking about, where you're worried about who owns the data and who has access to them. Have hidden cameras. In these states, they call them nanny cameras. And these cameras are super cheap these days. You can get a key fob camera on Amazon for $30. I mean, come on, anybody can do this stuff. Those cameras should be inside your home in places where only you and your lawyer know where they're at. Like, I wouldn't even tell your family members where they're at, so that if something bad happens with the state or an agent of the state against you, then you have evidence of what happened. And there is no way, absolutely no way, for them to know where those cameras are, and there's no way for them to gain access to them. And then, of course, your lawyer or your family members give that data to your lawyer, and you have a viable defense against somebody that's going to have a double standard and special protections in court, where they're going to believe their word against yours. Well, you're going to have a camera that's going to prove that they're a fucking liar. And you might be dead, granted. This could be a gunfight that you were in, but at least your family's going to win. That's the kind of thing that I'm talking about. And it actually doesn't take a lot of money. This is just pre-planning and being smart about it in advance.
And I'd just like to quickly add, I know that I've been talking about the British systems and what works over here, but that my local Bobby system of private security on microbeats, as they call them, that exists in the States. That exists in Virginia. That exists in my hometown. It's not. I know it does because I read articles on it the last time I went over there. It was they have private security forces for
Well, and also Cell
gated
411.
communities. Yeah, and Cell 411 to basically have communal activity. Because another thing that a lot of neighborhoods that have low crime rates do over here is just a basic neighborhood watch. And often there are people out here who basically will go out in the street and try to diffuse an argument just by basically being quite reasonable. Because usually it'll be like teenagers who are drunk or something like that. It's, you know, the usual kind of crap. And it's usually nothing, but it could be something bad if somebody doesn't sort it. But to be quite frank, a few stickers in the windows and whatnot, and people behave unbelievably well because they know they won't be able to get away with shit.
Well, they suspect,
And
and that's all that's necessary, because if you've got a house with a sticker and a house 2 doors down without a sticker, you're going to go with the house with the sticker, especially in a row system like Britain, where you have like very close by neighbors in some places
oh yeah,
completely next to each other. So there's a difference between like the infrastructure there as well. That means that effectively you go into the house without the stickers and signs. You don't go to the houses with them. It might change if
Yeah.
enough people got security systems, but it's a pretty effective deterrent for now.
What
It's
I've
more than
found-
that too, though. It's more than that too, though. Like, if I'm in a townhouse system, so if you
Mm.
walk down the road, or you drive down the road, and you're looking at townhouse to townhouse to townhouse,
Mm.
if you happened to walk up to my townhouse, my Kuna light will chime. It lets you know that you're on camera. You don't have to see the sticker that says, "Hey, buddy, you're on camera. Smile." You don't have to see that sticker because the camera will chime and let you know that you're on camera. If you happen to not see that or hear that, and you are sneaking up to my windows, you will see an alarm that lets you know that it has a vibration alarm on the windows. So if you move that window, an alarm will go off. So yeah, it's multi-level basically, but you want to make your house a hard target so that people that pass by that, a potential criminal basically, they're going to ignore your place and move on to the softer target.
There's one thing as well with regards to Windows. I don't know how, like, what you guys have at the moment with regards to like your window panes, but over here, most homes have something called double glazing, where you've got basically a barrier between two panes of glass. These things are insane. I mean, as most of you know, I had a house fire about a year ago, and they were trying to break into the back windows of the bathroom with a club hammer. And this is a fireman basically hanging on a ladder trying to smash open this window with the club hammer. And he wound up breaking the frame before before the glass went. That's how much force these things can take in most cases if they're a good quality window, which these were. So if you get a good installation, get something like argon glass, it's unbelievably tough. They are not going to get through that with ease. And it'll take a significant kind of force at a specific point to make it break, or fault in the glass to make it fail.
Yeah, it's all time basically. All your defenses, and the main thing for physical defense of your home is time delay. multiple layers to give you as much time as possible. So that's all this stuff does. It just gives you as much time as possible to defend yourself in a reasonable way. You want to have as much time basically as possible to defend yourself. And that's what all this stuff does. And the more layers of defense that you put in, the more time you have.
And of course, not defending yourself in Britain, because anyone who defends themselves in Britain is racist. So on that level, what do you do to secure your phones? Because we're getting into the last hour, and I'm going to bring up some phone-based things that you can do for security. Because we've talked a lot about essentially PC stuff. But what do you all do to secure your phones?
I use fingerprint encryption.
That's a good thing to bring up in the States. And in the United States right now, if you use a fingerprint, they can force you to provide your fingerprint because it's considered a biometric. So in the United States, I do not recommend people use a fingerprint to unlock their phone. Instead, you should use a password because the police cannot force you to provide that password. So apparently there's a big difference there between here and the UK.
What about you, Skip? What do you do to secure your phone?
I carry a gun.
Here, you want to unlock my phone? No, you won't.
No, that's actually, you bring up a good point. Finian, I think that's a good point, because I know that there were some legal precedents that the police were trying to say that they could force you to unlock your phone. And quite frankly, they could just knock you the fuck out and then just stick your thumb on there. So, I mean, there's a level of where you say, okay, I'm going to secure my things as best as you can. I will tell you that there are methods to get stuff from your phone without them having to put, a passcode in and stuff like that. And so what I would say is that, quite frankly, there really is no security for your phone. It really just depends on the level of who it is that you're trying to keep off of your phone. And so I'm of the opinion that, having some of it is just not being stupid, right? Like not getting on public Wi-Fi. Staying
or
off
just
of
using
public.
a Pyramid Wi-Fi box if you do.
That's another option. And so, like for me, I have really good Wi-Fi security that I had somebody help me put together. As I mentioned before, my brother works cybersecurity, and so he helped me with setting up my Wi-Fi so that I can have a good, strong signal that works all, quite frankly, off of the edges of my property, but at the same time, you're not going to get onto it, and so that's actually good. And then what I do is I have like an internal WAN, so I can send something to the printer, or I can save a document onto a shared drive here at the house that's not necessarily on any any of the public domain. I have a camera system set up that runs the entire perimeter of my property, and that includes covering each door, each entrance. And then what I do with that one is I have it go to a DDR hard drive that is not, you would not find. You just wouldn't find it. And so that's a good way. And then, of course, if you did find it, it's locked. It's in a cage. So you're going to be a while. Yeah, you're going to be a while. Because like Finian was saying, layers of security. I have the IR cameras that glow red at night, and quite frankly, that's just enough to warn somebody off. Because most people are like, I don't want to be on any kind of camera. You know, they're 1080p, so they work pretty well. And I've used the video footage to you know, catch teenagers coming and going. So I know it works. And so that's another level of security. I know we've talked about phones and we've talked about laptops. I do password protect everything as best as I can. But I mean, at the end of the day, if somebody really knows either A, who you are digitally, and B, where you live physically, it's just a matter of time before they're inside your stuff. And at that point, that's really what physical security is about at that point.
Right. Okay, so, but on that level, I have a folder on my phone called F Society, of shortcut folder or whatever. And it has apps that I use semi-regularly. And I'll list these apps, and, you know, generally speaking, these are great things to have in the case of a possible emergency. I have a Proton Mail app. Proton Mail is a double encrypted, essentially, email service, and it has your main password for your account and a secondary password as well that's used to encrypt your account further. So it's basically like two-factor authentication without two-factor authentication. Additionally, I have its sister app, I guess you could call it, which is Proton VPN, which is a VPN service that comes with Proton and is pretty universally fast enough for what I use it for. So I'd recommend both of those. Also, Orbot and Orfox. Orbot is a Tor app that you can get for your phone, and you just press the onion button, and suddenly a whole bunch of people who would have wanted to see you and what you're doing and sniff your data on the network you're on have a much harder time doing it for some reason. And it's because it's using the onion encryption and it's pushing it through whatever level of security you have set up on the app. Additionally, Orfox is a browser that you can use to directly interface with Orbot. And in general, what that means is that your browsing is secured by Tor in an integral way, in a way that means that this is also, by the way, available on PC, in a way that means that they're not going to interfere with each other in any significant way.
The Orbot app also has a VPN.
Yeah, well, that's pretty much what the Orbot is. And there's also Uniprobe, which you can, like, if you're in a country which blocks access, or if you're in a particular network in a country that doesn't, that blocks access, you can do tests for, and I'm going to read the list here: web connectivity, Facebook Messenger, Telegram, WhatsApp, HTTP header field manipulation, which is basically like if you click somewhere on a website and suddenly it's doing things with your data, you can suddenly see that and you can sort of sniff that out. Same with, and that's, by the way, something that would be like with a compromised router or whatever. And there's also like HTTP invalid request lines, where you would end up with a site that said that there was something wrong, but wasn't. At least I think that's what it's for. There's also video streaming quality and NDT speed tests, and both of those are relatively good, because if it's running slower than you think it should be, or than your network provider thinks it should be, there's a possibility you're being compromised in terms of information. Additionally, I use Decrypto, which is an app that you can use to essentially multiple layer encrypt whatever you're sending in terms of files, and it allows you to encrypt and decrypt based on specific keys that you have. So it's basically like a mega thing, only decentralized. And so I appreciate that a lot. I also use Wicker, which Fidian has sent me some messages on as well, which is a messaging app which lets you self-destruct your messages after, however long you want.
And what that means is that if you want your message to destruct in 15 seconds after sending, because you don't want the authorities to be able to read whatever you're saying later, you can do that. And it's extremely easy. Everything's encrypted. You get a username. I'm Insanity is free if anyone wants to add me on Wicker. There's also the Survival Manual app, which is available for Android, I think, only. And there's what this thing does is essentially it allows you to download a shit ton of information on psychology, power, planning, kits, basic medicine, shelter, water, fire, food, plants, poisonous plants, animals, tools, uh, desert, tropical, so like your environments, your whatever biome you're in, cold, sea, water crossing. It'll help you find your direction. It'll help you avoid and construct man-made hazards. Um, Basically everything you would need. It also has a multi-tool and various things on like ropes and knots. Whatever you need basically, and all you have to do is make sure you download whatever you want to your phone when you use it. And by the way, none of these people sponsor me, so don't ask. There's also Koinomi, which is a huge app in my collection because it's not huge in size. I'm just saying it's very important because it has a shit ton of different types of cryptocurrencies that you can use with it. And finally, there's Spyboy, which is an app that will teach you basic hacking skills in case you need to either monitor what something is doing or in case you need to access something that's being hostile towards you. Obviously, I would only recommend using anything like these things in a legal way. And if you decide to use them in an illegal way, I don't take responsibility for any of that bullshit because I don't want to get fucking sued. But, y'all know what I'm going to use it for if I ever need to. So effectively, that's what those are apps that I'd recommend. There are also apps you can pay for. Like the SAS Survival Guide has an app where you can easily and handily access all that shit, and it's fantastic. It's basically like your ultimate prepper's guide, and it'll show you in like any situation how to deal with whatever you're doing, as long as it's not a violent thing. For that, I would recommend 100 Deadly Skills, which is a relatively good book. And you can get that, as, I think, as an app, but if you can't, you can get that as a PDF for free online. Not that I'd recommend ever doing an act of piracy, that'd be illegal. But you can also purchase the book in physical copies if you're concerned about that. Same with the SAS Survival Guide. And if you have both of those, you basically have what you need from the Survival Manual app anyway. But it's always handy to have something in your phone in case you need to digitally prep and bug out eventually, like you've been hit or something with some information that doesn't quite apply to you. You're framed for something. You need to get the fuck out of there. You're being threatened, whatever. You need to have ways to deal with that. And so I would recommend everybody get these apps and whatever other apps people are going to recommend with their phones.
The main key I would recommend for people is that if you suspect that you might ever be in a confrontation or have a need to document in a audio or video way your interaction with other people, whether they be a state agent or not, you want an app that will upload that data and make it so that when your phone is taken from said people, there is no way for them to delete it. That's one of the reasons why I like Virgil's app, the Cell 411, because you can declare basically an emergency and your video data is uploaded to all kinds of people in your network and there's no way to delete it. I know even Facebook allows you to do this. You can stream on Facebook and basically everybody on your within your network is seeing that data and there's no way to remove it. And something like that's very important because, again, you might be in a gunfight, you might be dead already, but at least there's a recording of it so that people know what happened and they know what the truth is, regardless of what happens after the fact and what gets cleaned up and what does not.
Yeah, because you don't want to have your information suppressed if you're using it for a purpose.
Or in the case of Gray State, you're suicided.
Oh yeah. But no, he was totally just a crazy Muslim, you know? Not like the US government has ever used somebody's religion as an excuse to silence them or kill them.
Yeah, I often joke about this. As a private investigator, anytime the news reports a suicide, for me at least, you can decide on your own. It's, not up to me to make your decisions for you. But if they said that somebody committed a suicide, at this point in my career, it's a murder until I prove otherwise.
So I know that we're getting ready to wrap into the last hour, but I thought I would mention that I went ahead and I finished this last build that I was working on.
Cool.
And I was gonna go ahead and put it on video here for a second.
I'm presenting it to everyone right now, so if you put it on that, also if you put your phone on horizontal, it'd probably be easier.
Yeah, I got to figure out how to.
Was screen rotation on? Because it should be just as simple as like turning it left.
Yeah. All right. So right here.
There you go.
So
wow. You got quite a collection going there.
Well, these are my personal weapons. So I have an M110. The next one is the one I just finished building, which is a 308. And that is actually a pistol, believe it or not, with a 1-to-8 power on it. And then the next one is my primary carbine that I was mentioning that I have a 1,000 lumen light on. And then the last one is my house gun, which is also a pistol, and that's an 8.5. So
very cool.
That's
and on
the
that
collection.
And on that level, next week
How
we'll
is that
definitely
thing a
talk a lot
pistol?
about and next week we'll definitely be talking a lot about generally how to do things like that. And so I think that's where you're going to really shine. So I hope you're there. But it's a pistol because it's a legally qualified pistol. It's not considered an SBR or anything like that because of the way that it's machined and the caliber it fires, if I remember correctly.
Well, it's really strange, but if it's over 26 inches, it's considered a firearm. And so it's not a pistol, it's not a rifle, it's not a short-barreled rifle, it's a firearm, which is really weird. But and then the last one that I showed was technically a pistol. But yeah, so that was my little collection. I've built some of those have been around a long time, but the last ones I pulled apart, repainted some parts, and then the last one I was actually building during this podcast. And so that was what I was doing, especially when you guys were talking about stuff that I didn't know quite as much about, because this happens to be my forte. Next Sunday, I'm available. However, 2 Sundays from now, I will not be available. So just if I'm able to dial in, I will. But it's a good distinct possibility I might not be able to. But
and that's fine,
next week I can definitely be there.
Because next week we're going over a lot of physical prepping stuff, like what you can do to secure your home in a very tactile way.
Yeah. Well, and that's the thing is that, if you notice, those firearms had different purposes. So, I have one that, gets me, to the end of the street. And then I have one that, is a lot more mobile and small and maneuverable. And then my primary carbine is what I train with. When I go to classes, the primary carbine is what I take. But what I like is that all of them are very similar enough that if I can run one effectively, I can pretty much effectively run all of them because they're all very similar platforms. And then the last one is just, pretty much just what I would use in the house. It doesn't really go anywhere unless I need something that's small and compact, and I need, a low profile if I'm going in and out of a hotel and stuff like that. So I'm working on getting a violin case for the one. I think that would be nice.
Are all of those weapons non-serialized?
Some of them are, and some of them are not.
Not that it matters. I'm in Virginia where face-to-face sales are legal. So I've bought and sold so many weapons that the government has no idea what weapons I own and what weapons I've sold. So the fact that if they have a serial number on them, doesn't matter anymore because they don't know who actually owns it. And I mean, I guess if one of my weapons was used in a crime and they found it, they would be able to trace it back to the original owner, but it doesn't matter.
Right.
Which is
Yeah.
a beautiful thing because
It is.
they shouldn't know. Yeah, they should not know how many weapons I have, and they should not know where they came from. And
Well, you
that's
know,
the way it should be.
there's a couple ideas that people can do for some of these things. I know we're kind of moving into next week's, but maybe this will just be a sneak peek. So one neat thing that you can do is go get an 80% for every AR that you have. And then what you do is you build out that 80% and you put your AR back together. And then you take the receiver that had the serial number with your name tied to it on a 44, I can't remember the form now. It's been so long since I've signed one, I forget what they look like. But anyway, so what you do is you'd basically take that firearm and you would just find a licensed FFL and you'd sell it to them. And if you lost money, how much money would you be willing to pay to get a firearm out of your name? That's the way I look at it. And so basically, if there's an offset in cost, say it costs $50, but now that firearm's not in your name anymore. And so granted, you still have a firearm, but the point is that the serial number is going to trace in a different direction because they'll probably take it to a gun show and they'll probably sell it really, really cheap, to some poor soul that'll come through and go ahead and fill out the 4473. But two of those ones that I showed you are 80% that I milled myself. And I'm not a pro, but I've milled a couple now. I've done the same thing with my pistols as well. So all my pistols are 80% as well. There's a couple downsides to traveling with an 80%, because not all states recognize the 80% rule, especially when it comes to the capacity, because they might have like a 10 round magazine cap, or they just may not be very kind to people carrying them. And so, that is a caveat emptor subject. But I would also say that in that caveat emptor, there's also the, do you want to be carried by, judged by 12 or carried by 6? So there's also that.
Yeah, I'm in Virginia, and I cannot keep my rifles in my car or my truck or whatever because the states next to me, if just traveling across that border, that my imaginary line on the globe, makes it a felony. So I can't even keep those weapons in my vehicle because it would be quote unquote illegal to have them in those other states. And if I accidentally travel across that line, then they could arrest me and put me in a mandatory prison sentence of at least 5 years. So I don't keep my rifles in my vehicle anymore, unfortunately. But that whole situation is a joke by itself because I should be able to do that and I can't right now.
Hey,
Yeah.
at least you guys get to have guns. I have to rely on military assault spoons.
Well, at least it's not a straw.
Right. Well, and another thing I'll say too is I've said it in multiple hangouts in the past is if they try to take those military style weapons from me, that's when people start dying.
I think
And
it's
by the
important.
way-
I think it's important for everyone to reach a point in their adult life where they decide what line is not crossable. And it sounds like Finian and I pretty much have the same line. And we're not alone. There are other people that have very similar lines. I think that it's important that be known, just simply because, the people who vote to steal other people's freedoms. And right now, you can see it coming out of the woodwork with the 3D printed gun madness that's going on. Everybody's just shooting, feminine hygiene products all over the place over the fact that Cody Wilson, basically is putting these document or this information that, quite frankly, you could find at a library. In fact, you could find it at the Library of Congress, and you could also find it at the patent office, because for every patent ever filed on a firearm, they have the integral drawings of all of the dimensions of what everything is for a machinist. And I think that's kind of comical that, they want to castigate, him, but these files have been around forever. And on the line of digital security, now that we're on it, as far as digital files and saving digital files, some of these sites that you can put where they'll have free digital media storage up to 50 megs or whatever, or 50.
That's what MegaNV does.
Yeah, so that is actually the specific one that I used, and I have several different accounts created with them, so that I have access to those files wherever and whenever, because they would have to go in and they would have to destroy them one by one, and they would have to find the different accounts that have those on there, and of course I have them on my computer. But it's funny that all of that stuff is available on the internet. But what it is they want a whipping boy, and they want to go after Cody Wilson, who I think, in my opinion, is a modern day hero, and they want to go after him. But what I would tell you is that the more information this is available, and the more people that you are able to get into shooting, and then once they realize, hey, this is really cool, and then you kind of give them the whole, well, there's a whole lot of people that want you not only in prison, but would be willing to kill you over this.
Right.
Just owning this, just owning it.
And I do that a lot in my own private time. I may or may not have also uploaded a ton of defense distributed stuff to the cloud, so that people couldn't make it illegal at all.
Right. Exactly.
But I also may or may not distribute thumb drives to people at their request, full of documents like how to build explosives, and how to build various chemical weapons and survive chemical and explosive attacks, things like that. Essentially, I may or may not have distributed things like this to people in the past, with the explicit caveat that they absolutely never, with a huge winky face, use them for anything nefarious or illegal.
Right.
So there are plenty of ways to do these sorts of things. And in terms of digital security, my question to you is, do you encrypt any of your hard drives? You say you have a WAN. Do you encrypt that connection, or is it just a password?
It is encrypted and password protected.
Cool.
Yeah.
I would recommend everybody do something similar to that.
I agree.
I use Google Drive for so much stuff, and you guys are already chuckling, I'm sure, but Google Drive, basically, it's completely scanned. Like, everything that I do is public. And I've said it multiple times on past Hangouts, basically, that if you're doing something on the internet and it is not encrypted off the internet, and then you're transferring it to the internet, consider it public. You have no privacy. There is nothing secret whatsoever for anything that you're doing on the internet, unless you have an offline system where you're at a high level encrypting it and then physically transferring it to the internet connected system, and then the person on the other end is doing the exact opposite. If you're not doing that, assume that it is public. So basically everything that we do is public. And I assume that, and nothing that I am giving out here, everything that I'm saying, I assume that it's public. So you should prepare for that and understand it. So most people, that is their situation. Like, I have no reason to do that setup, so I don't currently do it. But if there ever comes a day when I have to do it, that's what I would be doing. You want to encrypt it offline and physically, as in like human walk it from one computer to another, carry it from one machine to another and then transfer it to the other person, and then they're doing the opposite on their end. Otherwise, assume that it is being read by governments and everybody else.
I agree. I think that that's a very good assumption. It's a shame that the expectation of privacy it is probably violated the most by the very entity that people said government should exist for in the first place, is to protect your rights. But what I would say is that, as far as just making that assumption, and what that means with that is caveat emptor. If you have opinions that are differing from your tyrant or your local tyrant leaders, this is a nice caveat, then just assume that some of them may or may not want to have you killed. And if you go into that just understanding that, I think it puts a little different perspective on things.
Yeah, and I think to piggyback off of that, I think a reasonable, because it seems like we're drawing down here is as to the breadth of knowledge of the people in the chat here so far. But I think a good way to discuss that is the fact that government fundamentally lacks a respect for privacy at all. And by using the term privacy and then having an entity which claims ownership of your land and just merely allows you to rent it, claims ownership of everything and merely allows you to exist on it as, part of essentially a fiefdom, a debt-based serfdom that causes a huge amount of tyranny and oppression. I think that fact, if anything, means that people need to secure themselves, whether that be physically by doing what I do and learning explosives and how to fight and shit like that, or what Skip is doing by building as many guns as possible for the collapse, or what Finian does, which is a similar thing, and also learning some mead crafting. Get a skill. Secure yourself by making yourself a valuable asset in a post-collapse scenario, and you will not be disappointed by the results.
I agree. I think that it's important. No one person can know everything about everything. And I know that my skill sets are limited. So what I try to do is I always try to expand my base, my knowledge base. But at the same time, I think that it is also a good idea to learn how to connect and how to find other people that have the skill sets that you are lacking yourself, so that you can figure out how to basically have an overlapping level of coverage of knowledge gaps that you think are important. And that's going to be a wide span, because you're going to look for electricians, because people need to fix things that are broken in a grid down scenario. You may need to try to figure out how to turn a vehicle into a generator, different things like that. And so having someone who has good mechanic skills is good. But I think in every group, somebody should have someone who is very tech savvy, who is really up on, encryption and cryptocurrencies and, securing your phone and securing your laptops. Think of them as almost like a digital security person. And having those layers of knowledge, even in a small group, you can pretty much become someone who basically has a very wide range of skills. And the reason I say that is because, if you think about it, that's how special operations works. So
right.
Special operations has, an A team, right? An ODA, an operational detachment alpha. And what they do is they have, a junior and a senior guy that have very specific skill sets that have a left and a right limit. And then the entire team also has a very broad range of knowledge that covers across each other. For instance, an entire ODA can operate you know, as a fire team, right? It's not like you got two people wandering off and they do this and then two people wander off and do that. They actually function as a fire team, but at the same time, you've got two guys that can build or blow up a bridge. You've got two guys that can, you know, pretty much take any weapon from the smallest, you know, from a bayonet all the way up to and including mortars and artillery, and be able to focus it on the enemy, and most importantly, teach others. And that's something that I think that that we probably need to touch on next week, which is, you know, it's one thing to have a really wide range of knowledge and know how to do all these different things. It's another thing to not share it. You know, to take that information and share it with other people, I think is vital.
Well, and it's also another thing to not have a, you know, a structure. In terms of what you do, there should always be a structure, and there should always be ways to communicate information effectively across that structure, which is why you should have both a digital and, what we'll be discussing next week, at least partially, analog way to deal with communications, and, you know, figure out how to send messages effectively enough to get your units, your neighborhoods, whatever structure you want to set up, to essentially be insulated from possible. I guess the best word I can find right now is threats.
Yeah.
Because if you don't have that sort of structure set up in advance of a bad situation coming up, you're gonna get fucked up. Some Negan is gonna come through there and destroy you.
Yeah.
So.
And you know,
and even now, by the way, like, you've got a huge amount of use for things like this. So don't forget that even now, having this sort of organization system is very, very good. Very good. And if you don't have this sort of organization system, you're going to be very vulnerable to many things that can happen pre-collapse, including government intrusion into your lives.
That's right. That's right. And quite frankly, you know, some people may find themselves in a situation where they are, depending on their geographic location, threatened by other non-state actors. And what I mean by that is, like, say, for instance, Antifa, right? Right now, Antifa seem to be more angry at trash cans than they are at gun owners. But what I would say is that there are elements, and there's definitely an attempted cross-link between, you know, the Everytown and the gun sense and the Million Mom March and the Antifa, where I think that they probably have a lot of the same support mechanisms, which means that they probably have a lot more in common with each other.
Well, and similarly, a lot of these truly alt-right groups, because people throw around the term alt-right like it applies to green frog posters, but it doesn't. What it applies to is the people who are truly alt-right and who believe, you know, in fundamental white nationalism and bullshit like that. And those people have oftentimes a very similar organizational structure to the kind that appeals to the left. There are many similarities, and when you have this sort of mentality where you've got to sort of ossify and stratify against all of the negative elements of the world, and then you pinpoint specific groups to be that negative element, you're going to have to organize like this. And if the average person doesn't organize in their neighborhood and community to have anything matching or similar, you're going to be fucked if any of these groups decide to try and make a collapse happen, which ultimately I think we'd all agree we don't want a collapse to happen. We just think it's very likely to happen. And the only way that it wouldn't happen is if people, you know, nutted the fuck up and decided that they were going to do things better. And I don't think they will. And I think that many of us think that they won't. But if they don't, then a collapse will happen. And the best ways to prevent that sort of thing from happening are to have a network and a support group capability to actually prevent these sorts of elements from growing in any strength or fervor, and prevent them from essentially taking over territories, because it's still basically war.
It is. In fact, I would say that right now we are dancing the line between a soft war and the early stages of an actual I hate to give it a name. I hate to give it a name because, I've likened Antifa to a communist coup for a very long time. And I don't mean to offend some of the sensibilities of some of the ANCOMs that I know dial in and listen. And so I'm going to say this in such a way that I'm not trying to be political or bullshitty, but at the same time, it's not fair to paint everyone with the same broad brush. And so I'm going to say this as delicately as I can. But what I would say is that there are people who are actively trying to subvert what exists now and try to implement full communism. However, what I would tell you is that they don't have much work to do because it's practically fucking full communism as it is. And what I've noticed is that over time, especially in what I've seen specifically on social media, is I've seen people try to paint themselves as I'm pro-gun, but you are an insurgent, like you are a revolutionary. And then they try to paint the brush of, you guys that are trying to push, for 3D printed guns and that people should own these types of assault weapons. You are the communist coup. And I saw it slowly start to turn in the last 2 weeks, where more and more people were starting to hit social media with this new message that it's the gun owners that are because see, they're associated with the trumpeters, and the trumpeters, of course, are in collusion with Russia. And so they're starting to make this linkage back around to where the gun owners, and when I say gun owners, I'm not talking about the FUDs that have a shotgun or a hunting rifle, and that's all that they ever would want or need because the only thing they kill is deer. I'm talking about the guys who have got very similar firearms to what the government has, or as close as possible without crossing that threshold of spending 10 years in a federal penitentiary. And what I would tell you is that those gun owners are the ones that kind of fall in that category of, I can own this. It's my right, and I can own this. And they see the reason for that right, and they see the reason for owning it. And sometimes that right is just so that it doesn't have to be used, right? I mean, the whole idea of the Second Amendment really was just that if that possibility that the citizen militia, if you will, was always there, then there never would be a need, one, for a standing army, which we all know that went out the fucking door. And then the other thing is that it would be there as basically a fail-safe of preventing tyranny. It was literally, as long as there are gun owners in America, there won't be tyranny. That was their mindset. Now, obviously, we've seen that failed. We've seen that failed, and it's sad, but it has failed. I'm calling it. It's dead on arrival at this point. But it doesn't mean that people still shouldn't be vigilant and still shouldn't be trained. But what I'm telling you is that the Second Amendment has not prevented tyranny in the United States. It didn't prevent it during the Whiskey Rebellion. It didn't prevent it during the War of Northern Aggression. It didn't prevent it during the civil rights, and some of the stuff that happened during the civil rights movement or the anti-war movement, which, by the way, also had a lot of communist underpinnings in there as well, because the unfortunate part is that there's flavors to everything, and so painting with a broad brush is really dangerous. It's probably most dangerous now because who could potentially be your ally because your views are very, very similar and your desired outcome are very similar. You can immediately ostracize, which is why I like how you have your coalition efforts. I really think that that's a brilliant effort. And likewise, I'm actually attempting to do something very similar, but mostly from the people where my roots come from, which are the gun owners. And I'm actually working to do similar, where I'm trying to get all of them, because there are a lot of libertarians that are gun owners. There are a lot of Republicans that are gun owners. Some Republicans think libertarians are outrageously they're too much into freedom, right? That's too much freedom. I don't want that too much freedom. I just want this freedom right here, just enough. I just want the tip. And so, and so what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to build that level of coalition, and then somehow maybe be able to meet Jeremiah's coalition somewhere in the middle. And I think that would be probably the best. That would probably be the best, effort. Quite frankly, I think that we would have a lot of success in that. But what that means is that the people who belong to Antifa, I think a lot of them are just angry, and they just want shit to break. And some of them do it for money, and others just do it because they're bored and because it's a great place to meet chicks and get high. But what I would tell you is that the people who are really behind the Antifa movement are the danger. I think that that's really something that's dangerous, because, if you think about the history of Antifa in Germany during its rise to the Third Reich, if you think about how that occurred, they were communists who were basically opposing the National Socialist movement, because the communist movement was against the nationalist side, and so I think that there's some interesting parallels, because they adopted the exact same flag, they adopted a lot of the same ideologies, and that pins them really, really close to the communist movement. And if you go and you look at the history of the efforts to basically move the United States into a communist country, the Antifa movement and the anti-gun movement are basically two wings of the communist movement. And I would say that includes the efforts to basically completely destroy the education system to the point where it's just all it is just brainwashing. And it's brainwashing that the state is wonderful, just like Neil Bortz said, that government will teach children that government is wonderful. And so, all of this being said, is that's something I think that's important when you vet people, when you try to figure out what their moral compass is to understand that you're going to have some people who say, hey, I believe in the Constitution, and the Constitution is like that by it's the law of the land, and that I will fight to protect. Okay, got it. All right, then you're going to find other people who are like, well, the Constitution's flawed. Articles of Confederation basically were in place. The Constitution was a coup against the Articles of Confederation, which is also true. I think that that's actually a fact. People don't like to look at it that way, because then they kind of look at it as, it basically overthrew an existing government, and it was secret. It was done in secret. The representatives that did the Constitution were actually sworn to secrecy, and were not allowed to go and talk to anybody about the change that was occurring. And then when they left the meeting, it basically there was a whole new government, and then they had to wait for it to get ratified, which is where the Bill of Rights came from, because the Anti-Federalists kind of dragged their feet enough that at least it was a compromise, unfortunately, but it was and so all of these things I think are vital conversations when you start talking about vetting people, as far as how much you want to trust in them, as far as what it is, what your efforts are, and what your plans are. As far as in a grid down scenario, things like that. And then I would say the moral compass is probably the absolute most important, which is, are you willing to follow the non-aggression principle? That's something that, to me, that's absolutely paramount, because in effect, that is Malum and Say law. You don't rape, you don't murder, you don't steal, you don't assault people. Everything is done out of self-defense, which I think is a moral way to live. And so, those are just a couple things that I think that are important to kind of underline if you're talking about the importance of having a network of people, is to understand that that network may be diverse, not just in knowledge and skill sets, but it might be a little diverse in regards to philosophies. But there's a couple things that you don't want to compromise on. I think the non-aggression principle is one of them.
Yeah, and that's the other part of it. Like you said quite a bit about essentially communist coups, but it's also good to remember that you can get invaded by the right as well, which is why there are things like Hoppians who basically didn't read Hoppe and who decided that they wanted to throw people out of helicopters and not do much else. And then there's also people who are out and out Nazis who've been trying to invade movements for a very long time and who use excuses like the evils of communism and the weak and strong argument to sort of push their way through other movements' defenses. So it's good to remember that it's not just the left, and the left can be a distraction from the right in many ways and in many cases.
I would agree. I think that as far as the right is concerned, in all of my days as a 3%er, and in all of my days as a oath keeper, because I was an oath keeper in the 90s, back when you had to keep that shit secret. And what I would say is that in all of those days, I never actually found anybody who was a neo-Nazi. Not once. In all of in all of those times that we talked about firearms, and in dealing with, whether it was a tyrannical government, or take Katrina, for instance, right? Where, Katrina, you had the National Guard come in and say, we're taking everybody's guns. Those types of scenarios, there was no, we're going to go and we're going to find all the black people and round them up and hang them from a tree. That you didn't find that because there wasn't anybody that thought that way. I think that if you were to actually infiltrate the KKK, you'd find out 3/4 of them are FBI.
Okay, but and I understand what you're saying there, but it's also good to remember who's president and who that emboldens, and the fact that essentially the only reason there are this many essentially tankies, because ANCOMs are fine, but tankies aren't. The only reason there are so many tankies, the sorts of people who would fly the hammer and sickle unironically, the sorts of people who don't recognize that the Red Star of China is bloody. Those sorts of people have become emboldened for a very long time based on systemic justifications and essentially an ossification of what they're saying by the university system. And so that has had a lot of time to build up. But at the same time, there's been a lot of time very recently for the right to gain back steam. And they've been pushing harder and harder to do so and ignoring anything in their way. And it's a really good thing to remember the fact that the reason that there are so many people of the left or the left variety that are so emboldened to even try to infiltrate in the first place is because they've been allowed to, and that the right might be allowed to for the next 6 years, which I think will be the case.
Well, that may be, but I honestly don't see Trump as being that right wing.
Well, does he need to be right-wing, or does he just need to say that he's right-wing and espouse enough right-wing policies that the right sort of creates a salivation complex and, sucks his cock anytime?
Well, there's no question that he is definitely very pro-statist and authoritarian. There's no question about that. But understand that, and you and I think we both agree on this, that the left and the right are both authoritarian. The difference
they're wings on the same bird.
They are because you have the neoconservative right if you will, that's the pro-war.
Which Obama and Clinton qualify as, by the way, if you look at what they did.
No, it's true. I agree. In fact, FDR was a neocon. He was a neocon progressive.
But isn't that the thing, though? Everybody's a neocon now, and they have been since basically Lincoln won and emboldened people to be fucking terrible tyrants and sacrificers of liberty. I mean, it's been this way for a really, really long time, and the seeds were planted with the Whiskey Rebellion. So, I mean, the sort of mentalities and the sort of people that people have learned to serve instead of the American people they should be serving, that's something that's problematic on both the left and the right. And they're both neocons, basically. Any of these people in power are neocons, and they're Republicans or Democrats in name only. So it's good to remember that.
I've always said that we should not replace one tyranny with another. And what's basically been happening is we have a false left and right, and we have a two-party system was a complete joke. It's not a two-party system. It's a one-party system. And the whole thing is an illusion to make people think that they have some control over the system.
Yeah, it's political theater. I agree.
Yeah, and we go back to the beginning topics where we're talking about preparedness and what we should be doing, what we shouldn't be doing. And granted, it is a document written by a state. So, I am not a statist, but I mention this often. The Virginia Declaration of Rights was written in literally 1776, the same fucking year that our founders declared independence from an empire. And in Section 13 of that document, they said that a well-regulated militia composed of the body of the people trained to arms is the proper, natural, and safe defense of a free state, that standing armies in the time of peace should be avoided as dangerous to liberty, and that in all cases the military should be under strict subordination to and governed by the civilian power. That specific section has so much power over our current day, because right now that is exactly what we should be fighting for. Granted, it was a state power that wrote that and declared it, but that is something that we need, because we should not be replacing one tyranny with another, and everybody should be training on a local and family and friend level.
I would agree.
To defend themselves, and that is what we need to fight this system, because anything else, we're going to end up being subjects, and I don't want us to be subjects.
I agree with you, and I think that when we talk about the left and the right, they don't want to get rid of the tyranny. They just want to be in charge of it. They want to be in control. They want to be the controlling party of that tyranny. And I think that we've seen that with both parties. I think that they've made it very, very clear. You can see it. It's evident. And I think that that's the dangers that most libertarians can very easily identify and say, bingo, both of these two parties are evil. I don't think the solution is to run out and start a third party, or anything like that. I just think that right now it's literally a war for the minds of the people, because it's getting other people to realize that, because the more people that realize that, the less people are putting in their weight and their effort into furthering the dichotomy of tyranny.
Yeah, I think it's worse than that. I think it's those of us that are paying attention that see what's coming, and those of us and the ones that don't, basically, and we're going to survive and they're not. It's just like the call right now. There's 5 people watching, and those people are going to be the ones that are going to live, and the other ones, all the people, literally, like all the billions of people that are not watching this chat right now, they're not watching this stream, they're going to be the ones that starve to death and die. And I've always said, and I still believe, that there's a mass culling coming. And this is what I mean by it. Like, all these people that are not paying attention, they have no idea what's coming. They're not prepared for it. They have no clue whatsoever. They're going to suffer greatly because of it.
Well, as long as we can help those 5 people and add another 15 people to this type of podcast, I think would be good.
Right.
But, you know, there are a lot of other people who do pay attention to a lot of these things. And I do know a lot of people that are readers and contributors to James Rawls' survival blog. Those people are going to live. There's a good number of those people that are well beyond anything that I have done to prepare. I mean, if you go in and you listen to some of their bios or you read some of their bios of what they've done, you know, everything is code named and everything is in a city somewhere in the Northwest or something like that, or outside the city somewhere in the Northwest. But I mean, they're not specific about where they are, but some of them have gone to great lengths. And all I've done is just make it my lifestyle. And so for me, you know, if I lose the electricity, it just means that my house is going to be a little bit warmer, you know?
Well, and that's the thing. Be the change and be a good person so that people will want to join you in being the change. Like,
Yeah.
affiliate with enough sorts of people that you can be effective. And that's the thing. I'm an anarcho-coalitionist. I coined this term, I guess. I could have sworn that it would have been there before, but I guess I made the term. And the term is for militant panarchy. It's designed to make sure that as many people interested in either minimizing or getting rid of government as possible can all talk to each other and have civil conversations. There are plenty of people who don't want to have that civil conversation, and they take great pains to make sure that the conversation stays as uncivil as possible. And some of those people do that because they want to manipulate it so that I'm fighting, you know, the ultimate enemy Antifa or the ultimate enemy Nazis, as though that binary is what matters. What really matters is who actually defends liberty and who actually does it on a personal level. And if they don't, then disassociate with that person. And I would say that the people who are willing the most to have as much agreement with those who they can agree with the most, at least, you know, for the most part, you don't need to agree on everything. Getting together and realizing that we're stronger together than we are separately, and that if we don't unite, we're going to die. The more people do that, the stronger a chance we have to actually prevent this from being what it could be, which is the end of humanity as we know it and the rise of the elites and the new society they want to build. And I would say that if you want to be a strong person, one of the first steps is to realize your individual worth and the fact that you should be concerned about you before you're concerned about being aligned with anybody anywhere else.
Yeah, this is me getting back to the whole, I don't want to replace one tyranny with another. And basically, by my meaning behind that is my objective in everything basically that I do in life is to make sure that my friends, and by friends I define them as people seeking to further individual liberty. I don't care what title they use or for what reason. If you're willing and seeking to defend individual liberty, you're my friend. And that's my goal in life, is those are the types of people that I want to survive. And the world will, of course, be a better place if those types of people are the ones that survive.
I don't think we have any disagreement.
Very cool. Yeah, I wanted to open it up. I wanted to open it up to any possible disagreement, but I think that we're relatively close to the end here. So why doesn't everybody here plug what they do, say where people can find them, and you know, give any final thoughts on this subject, and then we'll wrap it up.
Sure. I've got my mute off, so I'll start. This is Skip. I am on Twitter at the Free Rifleman, and you can also find me at Collapsitarian1 on Twitter also. And I enjoy these podcasts because I think that we delve into some things that that, you know, quite frankly, a lot of people are not comfortable discussing. It's not exactly what you would consider to be your you know, Christmas or Thanksgiving dinner conversation, and it's certainly it's certainly interesting because we all have different perspectives, and so I think that's something that makes this podcast great, and I'm glad that we're still doing it. And I appreciate you allowing me to be a part of it.
I'll follow up with that and say that I'm on Steemit, same account as this under Finian, and I'm a private investigator in Virginia, and I also do residential security consulting globally. So if you need help securing your home, let me know. I'll gladly help you as my time allows. I'm on Twitter as Liberty Pro PI, and again, like he just said, I appreciate the opportunity tonight to talk with the friends that we have, and also talk about the topics that we have, and to further what I hope is a better future for those of us that I consider friends. Thank you.
Lupinate, you can find me on Minds and Discord as Lupinate, or on Steemit as Anarchic Wolf. And I'm kind of hoping we can discuss a little bit at some point about how to mentally prepare for some of these things that are going to happen. Because, yeah, you can be as physically prepared as you want, but having your entire world crash down around you and have it happen for everybody else too is something that's going to leave some mental scars. So it's probably worth discussing how to mentally prepare for a disaster in the next one.
What about you, Aaron?
Yeah, I'm Aaron. You can find me on Twitter at Cape Cod Peace, and that's actually a very good point that Lupin had brought up, is the mental aspect of what an economic collapse is going to look like.
Yeah.
And it's going to hit everybody. It's going to hit your family. It's going to hit your friends, and completely redefine your life and how you interact with people. And that's I would love to delve into that at some point.
Well, we're gonna do that. We're gonna do that next Sunday, because I think mental prepping, your brain is part of your meat. So I would say that's part of physical prepping too, is finding ways to make sure your meat still stays like a good suit instead of being a prison.
Yeah, and as far as what we talked about today, again, just VPN and Tor network. It's that easy.
All right.
That's all I got.
Yep, and if you want to keep something really private, do it offline.
Definitely. Keep it in meat space. All right. Well, I think that pretty much concludes this topic. So thank you everybody for showing up. Thank you so much to the 2 new patrons on my Patreon. The fact that people are willing to do that still somewhat astonishes me, but as you know, as many people are willing to do that as possible, it's going to bring me that much closer to being able to make this on tracks instead of having to worry about odd work. And at that point, it's going to get insane in here. So with that being said, keep yourself very, very conscious of your online activity. Keep yourself conscious of your network, whether it be your network in your home or your network in terms of your physical interactions with other people, and try to keep your head on a swivel, because there are enemies around every possible corner. And that's not paranoia, that's just a fact. But smash the state, fuck the system, and I'll see y'all tomorrow morning on Bad Morning News at 11 a.m. Eastern Time.
Good night, everybody.